Hey everybody, this is Rydo and we're back to another live stream of Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel and video game news. Today is Monday, February 5th. We are getting apparently some kind of update here on Yu-Gi-Oh! Because they finally decided to do something more with this big empty space on the screen other than just showing a wallpaper. Of course, by putting something here, they also are covering up the wallpaper. Which it would be nice if there was at least a wallpaper gallery. Let's see, how close do we really have to a wallpaper gallery? You have this here, and then you can go into details here to see the wallpaper. And seemingly there's no way to get the text to go away or to center this image so you can see it a little bit better. And there's a little bit of movement, a little bit of bobbing up and down that you would probably still describe as live 2D type animation, but honestly, it's not to a level of quality that you really should use that phrase. It probably isn't even using live 2D as a technology. It probably is just a image that has a little bit of a background image, and then one layer has been programmed to bounce up and down. And let's see if there's really any difference in any of the other wallpapers, or if they just all bounce up and down. It seemed like they really just bounce up and down, very possibly just to prevent screen burn in a little bit. So yes, you can browse the wallpapers, but the concept of wallpapers are kind of silly anyways, and having you be able to customize your interface with a wallpaper is probably the least useful thing ever. So what is this when we click on it? Okay, sure wish that there was a little bit more to be shown here as far as what this is. It seems like I would suspect that this is some encouragement of playing against friends. Finally, 2.5 years plus after the game has launched, we may finally have a reason to actually play against other people. And I would suspect maybe this number is somewhat accurate, but I also wouldn't be surprised if most of these numbers are straight up just being faked, that some small percentage of the number is going up every few seconds. It seems like it's just total in the entirety of the lifetime of Duels. But if it was faked, then Indian Ocean territory would go up at some point, and it doesn't seem like it is. Maybe the increase amount was faked, but yeah. In the southern hemisphere, it seems like very few people are playing Yu-Gi-Oh! So we can somehow get a title, the Duels that Bond. We can get a icon. We can get a icon frame, which that's ridiculous. And then we can get a card case, and we can get a ultra rare in prism form card, Magicians, the Bonds of Unity. Okay, so I guess this is an event. It's going from the 2nd to the 18th. This event is held in both the Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Links and Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel, so that's part of the problem too here, is they're still supporting Duel Links when Duel Links doesn't quite play the same way as the collectible card game does, and Master Duel tries to play as much as the card game, as close to the card game as possible. But yeah, I guess the move here would be to drop support for Duel Links and push everybody to Master Duel. That would be hard to do though, because there is a issue here in that Duel Links has storyline, and you're seeing like Yugi and Kaiba and those characters in Duel Links, and there's just no storyline mode in Master Duel. And there's solo mode, but solo mode doesn't even have a story that recaps the events of the first anime series, even, let alone the other anime series. Some of this seems to also be taking place in the real world at the Tokyo Dome. Some kind of barcode. First, get your hands on a friendship chain. There are two ways to obtain a friendship chain. Visit the Tokyo Dome in person and scan the posted 2D barcodes to launch the app, or duel a duelist that possesses a friendship chain or friendship. Obtaining a friendship chain will trigger a special cutscene. There are 4 types of friendship chains: red, green, yellow, and orange. Chains you already have obtained cannot be obtained again. You can only obtain 1 type of chain per duel. You will not obtain any chains if you surrender, and the Tokyo Dome lottery ticket is over. So this is one of these like viral achievements where there was like an achievement for some games where it's like play with the developer of the game or play with somebody who's played with the developer of the game. So basically I just need to play Yu-Gi-Oh! It looks like, and then it will spread itself. Now we see different colors here. What was the other color? Orange? I have a red and an orange. I don't see a red winning anywhere here, if that means anything. And I guess we probably are going to just fill in colors on this symbol and then fill in like the Japanese word for friendship. So we just need to play people and hope enough people have played enough people. But I don't know how that really is going to work, because don't we have different servers in Yu-Gi-Oh? And boy, does this make more sense that it would be just where the duel pass is, or as another event over here. Yep, I guess this is what it's gonna look like. Finally. So each area that has the red more would be in red. So it's like it's a viral thing, which is, I guess, interesting, but it doesn't really change anything. And unfortunately, I have to take back what I said before. It's not encouraging you to play with friends. And we've got some more things available for purchase. Whole bunch of notes. Now I opened up Yu-Gi-Oh! To use it as background news, because for the past couple days, instead of scheduling things, I started to play a game called Sudoku Universe, which, and I'm going to mispronounce Sudoku almost always. Sudoku is what I often mispronounce it as if it was like Count Dooku from Star Wars. But yeah, I started playing Sudoku Universe, played through and some of the easy puzzles, some of the medium hard and hard puzzles, and then there was some extra expansion puzzles, and I really felt like the interface was very lackluster compared to what I've seen Cracking the Cryptic on YouTube do with his website and his apps. And so then I looked on Steam and saw that there is a free to start Cracking the Cryptic game that's been released like in 2022, and so I started playing that. there is a huge difference between the puzzles in Cracking the Cryptic, which is the name of the app on Steam and the name of the YouTube channel, where they have hand-picked curated puzzles that are going to be fairly interesting and intriguing, and Sudoku Universe, which is really just giving you very classic Sudoku puzzles with no variants, and giving you basically random layout. They're not even really naming the puzzles or anything like that, as if that might be a small hint in the name. But mostly the problem with Sudoku Universe is the interface. The interface is just vastly inferior compared to Cracking the Cryptic's interface, and even Cracking the Cryptic's interface, while it is ways better, still has room for improvement. It's a little surprising that the middle mouse button doesn't do anything in the interface of Cracking the Cryptic, and that there isn't a default option to press a mouse button 4, 5, 6, 7, 9, which gaming mouses usually have more mouse buttons to toggle multi-selection mode. And then there are times when you've selected something and set a number and you're still on that number, so you'll set one of the squares in a Sudoku box to number 1, and then if you accidentally click the button to number 2, it'll just change it to number 2. When after setting a number and saying, I am sure this number is this number, it should deselect by default. And that's just a simple programming issue. But yes, the major problem, to get back to where I started telling this story, is that Cracking the Cryptic's app, as far as I can tell, has absolutely no sound effects and no background music at all. And that is just crazy. It makes sense. Why do we get so many of these wallpapers that are these goblin characters? I know nothing about these goblin characters, but clearly there's something about that in some expansion or story that's going on. Yeah, it's just unacceptably weird to have no option for music. Even if you were gonna start the game with music muted, it's just kind of crazy. It makes sense when Cracking the Cryptic YouTube channel is solving the games, or to keep, or they're solving the puzzles on a website, because websites wouldn't really be allowed to make sound effects. You could program a website to make sound effects and play music in the background. It's just most people's web browsers would mute it by default anyway, so people would find it annoying on a web page. But when you're selling an app, even a simple puzzle app, it needs some sound effects, some clicking when you click things, a nice little beep at you when you make a mistake, a subtle orchestral style music in the background to not drive you crazy as you're just sitting in silence. Most people, I'm sure, could always bring up their own music, or a podcast or something like that in the background, but that is true for any game. That doesn't make enough of an excuse. I guess I don't have anything else to buy. Well, I wanted to check here. Let's see. This guy's online. If I click this guy and look at his profile, I can't really see anything here that would highlight whether or not he has played against anybody else. And I don't think this is a case to do this, that you have to friend duel anybody. It seems like it is, though. Friendship duel. Dueling with friendship and friendship chains is known as a friendship duel. Seems like they're redefining what friendship duel means. See, and this is almost certainly translated from Japanese. So I think what they're trying to say is that friendship would be these. And I guess maybe orange or red came out fairly late. So there's two ways this is either going to go. I'm going to either have to friend people that have it and play them, and then try and spread the friendship, which would give us a reason to do friend battles for the first time in 2.5 years. Or I can just duel people, and they've redefined what they mean by friendship, and I can just play ranked. And I guess we'll start with ranked because it would be fairly stupid to sit here and try and wait for somebody to challenge me to a friend duel. Trust me, it happens, despite the instructions in the chat saying please don't do that. But there's possibly finally a reason to take people up on their request. But apparently not, because this symbol here and this symbol here wouldn't really be here. Team battles and casual matches seem not to be part of the plan. This might be a decent cross achievement here overall, though, because so often up until this point we've also been forced to stop playing ranked to do an event duel, and then that has just constantly kept me at platinum at best and never let me get high enough because I'm just not going to put enough time into it. Speaking of putting time into things, so it was taking me probably an hour and 45 minutes on average to play one of the basic classic Sudoku puzzles in Sudoku Universe. Definitely I was doing that as an experiment to just see, could there possibly be a future where maybe I just stop. Maybe I just get frustrated with Yu-Gi-Oh! Completely and stop playing it, abandoning it, and just do Sudoku puzzles during the live streams. Particularly that is a concept that would work, because then you don't have the 300-minute timer. You don't really have daily quests otherwise, and you don't get new content in a Sudoku puzzle. Although Cracking the Cryptic probably does update their apps with new puzzles. Whereas Sudoku Universe, after you've done a certain number of puzzles on easy, you just unlock a random generator on easy, which weirdly Cracking the Cryptic doesn't have a random generator, and it probably would be helpful if there was just a random generator for the small audience that would have solved all of the handcrafted puzzles. But that might be in one of the 6 other Sudoku games that they actually sell. And that's been the problem, is Cracking the Cryptic under the publisher Studio Goya has like 6 different Sudoku games, each based on a specific variant. So you have Classic Sudoku, you have Killer Sudoku, you have Thermometer Sudoku, you might have like a German Whispers Sudoku, Kopke Sudoku, I think is another one. Night Sudoku. Seems like there's infinite potential for more variants, and for them to potentially just make a couple more games at any point. They're not asking that much. 6 games at like $3 is less than one full $60 game. But it is still weird to potentially either commit all up front to buy the whole collection, or to buy one and then burn through it over the course of a year or longer. Which, if I was live streaming Sudoku puzzles, it definitely would be a case where I would literally only be solving one per live stream, and the amount of time it would take me could be extremely wild. And this is part of the problem, is I'm making this pre-recorded series as an experiment, and the first puzzle they gave me in cracking the cryptic took me like it took me 80 minutes. So an hour and 20 minutes. That's fairly reasonable to, at least for in comparison to how long it seems like it takes cracking the cryptic's own YouTube page to solve the puzzle. But then the next one took me 150 minutes. And then like the next one took me 180 minutes. And so 60, 20, 180, 180 minutes is 3 hours to solve one puzzle. That's pretty insane at that point as far as the length. And there's just no real end in sight to say that I would get better or faster at solving the puzzles. So yes, you wouldn't have the problem of a timer and then auto surrendering if you get distracted and are not paying attention, but you already have a case where even when I'm fully paying attention and making a pre-recorded episode on some of these Sudoku puzzles, they are taking 3 hours, potentially even more than 3 hours. And yeah, that is a lot of time to commit. My only hope here in wasting all this time, while also enjoying myself, to actually do these, the first 40 or so free to start puzzles on Cracking the Cryptic app. My only hope is that possibly these episodes would be watched by enough people from beginning to end that it would get the videos promoted more and get me potentially a lot of watch time. Which, yeah, that could be helpful. If all of a sudden I had a ton of watch time, then I can take the next step to be closer to being monetized and running ads. It would still probably have to be a lot of watch time though. I should have activated that ability. Oops. I was misthinking there. Seems like there's something he can do. I basically need 4 times the amount of watch hours I have right now. Well, I didn't plan it this way, but I think this is going to work out fairly nicely. I've just like decimated his entire strategy. I would also, though, even if I quadrupled the amount of watch time I have, I still would need about 250 more subscribers too. YouTube tells me I'm gaining subscribers, but I think it is very much a case where I'm losing subscribers as much as I'm gaining subscribers, or they're just making up numbers overall. It doesn't seem like it's just trending up in any high enough amount that, like, I feel like I was at 740 a week ago, and I feel like I was at 740 a month ago, and I wouldn't be surprised if it's very much going to be a case that even if I did get 1,000 subscribers, the YouTube partner programmer didn't look at those subscribers and say, actually, we're going to recalculate this and eliminate and invalidate half of them. So really, I would want like 2,000 subscribers just for consistency's sake. You also don't want to just get into the partner program for 1 month and then fall below 1,000 subscribers or fall below 4,000 watch hours and then be back in the same place you were. I already had that happen. I already was in the partner program back in the day, a few years ago, where you only needed like 1,000 watch hours and 100 subscribers, which was much more reasonable. It's not activating anything at the moment. So yeah, anyways, that has been what I've been doing over the weekend. That and watching Farscape, which watching Farscape on Amazon Prime's freebie is completely unacceptable in that there are specific episodes, some of the, I probably like a best of the best collection that somehow got a different licensing agreement to it, and those specific episodes in season 3 just are not included with ads. So you're skipping over what would be the absolute most important episodes of the season. Whoops. How did this happen? I only had 2 things in the graveyard. I was expecting to have 4 things in the graveyard. I talked about on Friday that I had made this like new program in OBS to try and make clips, and Friday was the first test stream. I ran into a problem. It did work with some problems. First of all, the comma separated value file it made repeated a lot of information, so it would listen to when I started to talk on a window, and then it would wait for silence and then put an in there, and then it would make another line on the same window where it then would put yet another line. So there were just a lot of chunks there of where the first instance should have been the start time, and then the last instance is probably should be when I first go quiet, or a minute, which is the maximum, whichever is shortest. So that was one problem I'm testing today to see if I fix that. Otherwise I may have to make a more complicated thing. The other problem I ran into, though, is while Advanced Scene Switcher's current version on Friday could let you figure out how long you've been recording, it pauses the time when you hit the pause button. And so almost every stream now, or I would say at least a significant number of streams, I'm running into incidences where I'm either needing to pause for one reason or another. Usually it's because I just need to take a bathroom break. And so what happened on Friday is I paused for a bathroom break and the stream kept going, and I showed some playback of Yu-Gi-Oh! Well, which that's what I do. I pause the recording to just live edit it out the break, and then I'll go to Yu-Gi-Oh! During live streams and just have watch a duel live and have the duel lives play back. So that's what I did. So I paused and I unpaused, and there probably was about 20 minutes, let's guess, of time difference there. Well, because of the pausing and unpausing, that meant when I did the news after the pause and unpause had happened, it was off by about 20 minutes. At least that's my guess. I didn't bother to investigate it any further. Shouldn't matter too much. I contacted the maker of Advanced Scene Switcher, who is by far, I think, the nicest person I've ever dealt with on GitHub, compared to several other projects that have either completely ignored me or people who have just completely tried to argue or ridicule me. I mean, there's people with way too big of egos on GitHub, and it just seems like it's kind of ridiculous to even have your project be public if you're not really capable or wanting to have a collaborative effort. But fortunately, that is not the case for Advanced Scene Switcher. In fact, he's perhaps too nice in that he very quickly made a test build, and so now I'm running the test build of Advanced Scene Switcher to get the streaming time instead of the recording time, which is what I needed instead. I need to know how many seconds have elapsed since I started streaming. Therefore, that should be within maybe a second or two, the exact same number of seconds to type in the clips. And if there's like a second or two difference, that's not a big deal. I can programmatically fix that. I can adjust that with my macro, which will have to work once again with Advanced Scene Switcher. I wish this wasn't a case where I'm always switching between using OBS and Advanced Scene Switcher to produce some information or produce some content, and then I'm having to move to UI Vision in Firefox to make a macro to input that information into YouTube Studio. But there really is no reason why those two things should be connected. Almost nobody, I'm probably one of maybe 5 people in the world that is heavily using UI Vision and Advanced Scene Switcher together. Most people are using Advanced Scene Switcher to do probably way more simplistic things and straightforward things. And most people that are using UI Vision are probably not trying to upload videos or make clips on YouTube with it. Ideally, if there was an API in YouTube to just make clips, you would want to just directly communicate that information. And there's a small chance you might be able to do it that way, but probably not. There is much more integration this is the first animation of the bonds of friendship. We've gotten the green chain, join friendship duels to obtain exclusive rewards. As an annoying beeping sound effect. Chains that bind. This definitely is very much reminiscent of the first anime series when Yugi and his three friends, which his three friends played as much of a role as they could, but they really get forgotten later on. But they all put their hands in and draw a Japanese symbol for friendship, and then for the rest of that season or so, you see they all have, Yugi has a symbol on the back of his hands. I think part of the problem with the idea of the bonds of friendship actually helping you win a Yu-Gi-Oh card game, even in the anime series, is that while they could definitely overemphasize that pretty much for that one arc, after Yugi basically wins in that first arc, he can't repeat that theme or do the same gimmick again without it just becoming fairly repetitive. It also gets in the way of what they wanted to do, which is have the friends go on their own path or even compete against Yugi. And there's just a large split too as far as the friends. Like the female friend in the comics was supposed to very much just be the girlfriend of Yugi. In the cartoon, in the anime, they in particular the English version of the anime, they de-emphasize that quite a bit. And her deck, I think, is just like harpy ladies, or a weaker harpy ladies than the more interesting lady that plays harpy ladies. And then Joey plays the Red Eyes Black Dragon deck, which is constantly worse than the Blue Eyes White Dragon deck, and also worse than the Dark Magician deck that Yugi would play. And then I couldn't even tell you the name of the other male friend because I don't believe he even plays Yu-Gi-Oh in the series. If he does, he plays it very infrequently, and yeah, I couldn't really with any confidence guess what kind of deck he would play. With the four friends, you would think there could be like 4 elements or 5 elements, where like Yu-Gi-Oh might play, Yugi would play like a dark deck, and then Kaiba as would be a light deck, and then the other 3 friends could be like a fire, water, and a earth deck, and maybe even throw in another friend for a air deck or something like that. Whatever the different symbols are here, but they really don't do that either. And Yu-Gi-Oh is so convoluted around that, in that you don't make decks just full of light characters or dark characters. You make decks full of zombies and specific zombie cards that synergize with other zombie cards, and then you're playing a zombie deck. And usually, if you're really going to succeed in the meta, you're playing a zombie something else deck, and then there's 2 themes that are combined and that somehow are synergizing. And that's where I end up playing the Tri-Brigade cards and the Zodiac cards to play a deck called Zodiac Tri-Brigade, which is something that I just got offline probably a year and a half ago, as far as one of the top tier meta decks. And I would highly recommend doing that fairly early, otherwise you are just going to struggle to find a deck that wins at all. Problem arises though is that you're probably only going to have enough crafting points to make one top cheap budget mid-tier, top-tier meta deck. You're not going to have enough, if you're a free-to-play player, you're not going to have enough even a year later to update your deck or move on to a different meta. And long since people have stopped playing Zodiac Tri-Brigade, even though it's still fairly competitive. I did subscribe to a few Yu-Gi-Oh! Card YouTube channels, but I've actually not clicked on any of those videos since I've done that, so I just don't think I have the enthusiasm there to spend the extra time. And part of the problem too is Yu-Gi-Oh! YouTube channels are going to be talking about the actual card game, either the original card game in Japan or the trading card game in the West, instead of Master Duel. And Master Duel is probably a little bit further behind than the current meta is for the original card game or the trading card game. There was another thing I was supposed to program, and then I forgot I was supposed to I was going to program it, which surprised I really have any extra time for anything. But yeah, in working on the potential clip program for Advanced Scene Switcher, and realizing that I can get the amount of time a recording has taken, that gives me a number, as far as a number in seconds, of how long, and from that you can calculate how big the video file is going to be. So from that, I probably just could program an arbitrary number of seconds that I think an average PC would take to convert and remux the video in MKV format, which is how it records, OBS records by default, into MP4 format, which is more preferred, at least it used to be more preferred by YouTube. At some point here, I think YouTube will adapt an even better format, and OBS will adapt an even better format. I think we are close to that happening. And then that might change things quite a bit. And I need to know how long I've been recording by some metric, so I can then calculate how long I need to wait before my already existing macro tries to launch a launch the video that was just recorded, to make sure everything recorded correctly, and to just have a automated check, which really this should probably be programmed in. It would make a lot of sense for it to be programmed in, for videos to automatically launch after they've been recorded, so you can always check your progress, make sure you did everything correctly, make sure you're not... I don't think I can do anything more because I don't have any more cards. So let's just destroy face-up cards. 7,000. I could summon a 3, and then I could summon a 4. And that's probably the right move. You do this, treat that as 2. You do this, treat that. There's really just way too much that goes on here. Way too many cards that are playable. Okay. Now at this point, do I have enough to special summon something? Seems like I probably can. Okay. Next step. Summon this. Or link summoning this. And I think we'll just link summon this. Under attack, doesn't matter there, so we'll click no. And activate this. And toss this. 78 seconds more. Okay. One turn kill? Do we have a one-turn kill? I do believe we do. It took forever to do it, but it'll work. So, looks like we're gonna get another color. A title is given to passionate duelist who finds answers in duels. All duelists are connected to star-crossed duels. Nonsense, really. And I hope no person is finding answers to life or answers to anything other than dueling itself through dueling. So apparently, either you get it filled in if you give a green, and then you get the chains if you receive. And I assume you might be able to receive and give at the same time. Very basic, just hand symbol here, but I guess I don't know what else you would animate. Red chain obtained, join friendship duels to obtain exclusive rewards. So we're probably going to play like 4 or 5 duels and have all the colors. It's probably already so viral, and by them adding these extra animations, we're just really getting in the way of getting back into the game. Guess we can check back here on the front and now see that the icon has changed. It doesn't make a lot of sense though that it needs to be this wide background. Seems like it'd make a lot more sense if this was just square. And apparently we've already done all the daily quest stuff. And this is just a login thing. I don't know how you fix this as an idea. It's not a terrible idea to encourage people to play ranked more and give an extra reward for playing ranked, but any kind of viral achievement is either going to die at a dead end, where it's going to be a case where only a few people get it and those few people don't spread it, or it's going to just very quickly overwhelm the entire player base and everybody's going to have it. It would almost have to be that there would be some kind of harsh metric where you would have to play against 10 people with green, or even 2 people with green, to try and choke down the spread of it and make it a lasting event. At the core of it, this concept would be better, and maybe this is asking too much, but it would be better if you played against people, and whenever they played a new card that you haven't seen before, you get a 1 out of 100 credit to gain that card. So then you would encourage people to play all kinds of wild bets to spread ownership of the cards, which inherently maybe you don't want to spread ownership of the cards, because then that dilutes your advantage of it. But that might be a nice balancing force too. If only a small select of whale players have certain ultra rare cards, and then these whales are playing against a bunch of other people and defeating them, well, as they defeat more people, they're spreading the chance that those other people would also have the ultra rare cards and then become more powerful, and then go back up against the whales and balance the challenge of the entire player base. So that would be an interesting system. Plus, we know there's about 10,000 cards in Yu-Gi-Oh! So that is a viral concept that could go on pretty much forever. Eventually, you would have almost everybody having at least one copy of every card. You could certainly narrow that down a little bit more by just giving us crafting points, which we almost never get crafting points anyways. You can only get it by having duplicate cards and dismantling them. So if I got crafting points every time I saw somebody play a card against me that I don't own 3 copies of, that would be nice. Even if it is like 1 crafting point and you need 100 to craft a single card, that would still be nice. It would encourage everybody to play more. Yes. Overall, I don't have anything else as far as the catch-up section goes. There is a Steam festival happening right now as we're speaking. I also started late today because I stayed up all night. It's kind of insane. I started playing Cracking the Cryptic probably about 12 hours ago. I made 4 episodes, each at least 2 hours long. And while I was sleepy at the end of that last episode, I'm not really feeling burnt out. The hand-picked special puzzles that Cracking the Cryptic has just is not boring. It really isn't. And for the most part, they haven't been too difficult to the point where they would frustrate me, which that's your 2 dangers, is that either the puzzles are going to be boring or the puzzles are going to be frustrating. Let's discard this card. But certainly I can't continue that momentum forever. Like, if I was going to do Cracking the Cryptic, every single puzzle of the 6 different games, I'm going to have to, at some level, either just dedicate an entire time slot to that, always, would be a little too much of a commitment. Or and I definitely I could do that, but I also need to see kind of a major rate of return as an issue there too. I can't have a series go with averaging 3 hours or longer and then get the same amount of views that I would have gotten had I made just had I made just a regular 22-minute, 44-minute thing. That was another thing I was gonna program and I forgot to do it. I'm doing a lot of stuff. Notably, also I've just completely backburnered the Smart on Air sign project after spending all that time. It's stupid and ridiculous. But yeah, it's happened. Regardless. Lost my train of thought. Yeah, there was something else I was going to program that I was saying, and I think I've literally just, in the process, also forgotten what I was saying there. And what I was thinking I was going to program. Yeah. I'm juggling far too many balls in the air at the same time mentally. Obviously. Okay. Then the next step would be to summon this and this, I guess. That card can't be destroyed. Almost done here. Seriously. Oh, this is too tough of a card. Too tough. We will see if it can handle Zeus. Well, honestly, if Zeus can't take it out, I may not be able to take it out at all. I still do feel a little iffy about the clips and the idea of making clips. It does speak to a larger issue, certainly, as far as just reading headlines coldly and blankly and not even really caring. I do need to know that information, or at least I don't really need much of anything, but I would like to know this video game information to be informed and be a better critic overall. So I need to read the headlines, so making content while making content while learning does have an appeal, but I don't know. I don't have a great system to make that entertaining. As it were. There we go. Finally, Zeus cleared everything up. I still have a slight concern here that different regions wouldn't have not spread the different colors of the bonds of friendship, but so far we've seen green and red, so we'll probably see blue and orange too. It's somewhat questionable how it got into that state, because you would have thought that if people got lotteries to go to the Tokyo Dome, that would be pretty much just Japanese people playing on the Japanese server. Don't have anything we can do with that. Another 1-point kill, but I have pretty much devastated this guy. Of course, that's pretty much what's going to happen for a while here. In that I'm just working my way back up the rank through the gold ranks, and as quickly as possible getting the platinum makes sense. Is my desire. Okay, so let's talk about video game news overall, and this is where I guess I put in the opinions and ramble more. The Retro, maybe don't have too much to say here, has version 1.17.0 being released. Let's see if we can maybe get a different bit of a changelog. It probably would be helpful to just come back here. Let's see. Right. So now looking at the release. Change logs here. Seems to be mostly fixed. Seems like they're doing something here with an AI service, which seems to be based for automatic translations and subtitle placement for, I assume, playing games that don't have English languages or whatever language would be appropriate for you. There's some Apple bug fixes, there's some audio interface fixes. Chivos are how they integrate achievements into games that are or ROMs that wouldn't have had achievements. EMS script is probably emulation station scripts, specifically for using the front end of an emulation station with RetroArch, libretro. Yeah, libretro is the organization. Inputs would just be inputs. Laka, I think, is a more simplified programming language. Okay. We have one more chance at this before I need to fill my graveyard again. And two more chances of summoning this guy. It looks like we don't need any more chances. I don't even have to really win, I just need to not auto-surrender by running out of time. So we've now shared the red, and that gives us this 25th anniversary icon. But noticeably, the 25th anniversary icon is almost all in Japanese. Didn't make an English version of it, which is fine. And now we have yellow. And so next time we play, we'll pass on yellow, certainly, and probably just gain orange. It would be very crazy that this somehow took longer than 2 more games, or it took a super long time to get that last color. Yeah, I guess most of this changelog is probably not worth scrolling through very slowly. There's a bunch of menu tweaks here, specific Wii U tweaks, Windows 32 programming tweaks, Wayland tweaks. This doesn't feel like that anything new is really being highlighted as far as new features. And ideally, I'd like to see, when you see a changelog, for features to be highlighted more than just being either hidden in what are a lot of bug fixes versus new code. Particularly since this is version 1.17.0, that would imply to me that there should be some new features being added. And if I look at this next post here, RetroArch 1.17 branch is going to expand NetPlay support for playing multiplayer games, where originally they would have been played on 2 or more separate consoles or computers connected together. This is currently being supported by 2 cores, DOSBox Pure and GPSP, which I'm not sure what GPSP does. GPSP might be like a Game Boy situation. And they have just a couple of screenshots being shown here. I didn't know you could even play Doom in multiplayer. I guess you can. It probably says multiplayer right on the main screen of Doom, and I just have ignored it my entire life. So yeah, they're continuing to try and modernize extremely old games by adding modern network support and connectivity. And it's stupid to even mention this one out loud, but I've also been putting thought in another project, potentially. I'm not going to act on this one anytime soon, more than likely. But I was thinking about how could you have cameras for like a kids museum, or even the Lego stores that have the little Lego museums next to them, while also doing your very best to accommodate parents who really don't want their kids to have access to just like a full-on iPhone or a full-on camera, and you just have some special requirements in that. If you were going to have people put down, say, a deposit to rent out a camera, and then there was an SD card in it, you would just have a massive amount of kids taking SD cards. You would have a smaller percentage, but still probably a high percentage of people just taking the cameras. If they are just old cell phones, like iPhones, that you're using as a camera, then people definitely would grab those and just walk off with them like crazy. So on that, Adafruit is making a build your own camera device that still works by default by having a SD card be the place where you save the images, but it is definitely cheaper at just about $25 and can only take pictures, and that's it. It's not doing anything else. And on that thought, taking it to the next step, which this is definitely thoughts on thoughts, because it's a build it yourself camera, I could hard program it to look for a specific Wi-Fi access point in range of the Lego Museum, for instance, and then stop working if it leaves the access point. On top of that, you can also then have it upload directly to that access point and not save anything to the SD card. So then you don't have to put SD cards in it. So then you would have a relatively cheap, like $25 camera that could be broken without any big loss, compared to giving $300, $400, $500 iPhones away, or requiring like credit cards on files for somebody dropping an iPhone. And that is all to solve the what if somebody steals it, what if somebody breaks it issue, if you're going to hand out cameras at like a Lego museum. And why would you want to do that is because you would want to potentially let kids take pictures, let poor kids take pictures maybe in that one instance, let kids only take pictures in that one instance instead of just always having a camera on the phone. This is obviously not accommodating or doing anything special for parents that would just by default hand their phones to their kids, or parents that would have phones and they would just take their own pictures. But also, if you're running the Lego Museum, you would like to promote your museum and show smiling, happy faces, and photography can do that. This is in part by Bar Rescue, is that a lot of some of the Bar Rescue updates, he adds photo spots, very specific spaces where he's encouraging people to take pictures in the bar and hashtag it and retweet the hashtags, and have something to put on their social media and promote themselves. Of course, you have that extra problem of kids taking pictures of kids and parents being upset by that, which would really require that, regardless of whether you were using like an iPhone that would then put the photos, renting out iPhones that put all the photos on an iCloud account, you then would have to manually look at all the pictures and make sure there isn't anything inappropriate there. And you probably almost certainly would have to have any parent that's renting out the cameras sign some legal waiver saying I'm giving permission for my child's image to be put online as part of a promotion. Yeah. But yeah, you could, in iPhones, you could have several people. I imagine you can have any number of iPhones that connected to one iCloud account for photos. I haven't really researched it. And then that one iCloud account would then have to be monitored, and then the good photos, the photos that are appropriate, would get put on a social media account, and the bad photos would just be deleted. You could also certainly, in your gift shop, sell prints of the photos, and you could certainly take the appropriate photos and put them on monitors in the museum fairly quickly. But that would require somebody to just constantly look at all the photos. Before you put them on the monitor. It's not too far away from when they take photos of people in the crowd and put them on the big screen TVs at sporting events too. You're trying to get that viewer interaction. You're trying to drum up interest. I'm pretty sure you could do the same thing with Android phones too, particularly the Samsung phones. Newer Samsung phones have a kids mode that you can lock the phone down into, and you can put a camera in that, and then photos in that camera roll more than likely can be uploaded to a Google Photos account. They could then just be curated and monitored. Yeah. What is this guy? He's defending it, I guess. But I'm not letting him end it fast. But yeah, it's much more appealing to me to have a custom-built camera and encourage the kids at like a Lego museum to say, here's a camera that is custom-built, and you can see the components on the inside, and you can see that there's not really anything that is too stealable except for the camera itself. Arguably, the sound effects on the sharing here is a little bit loud. This frame is incredibly boring. It literally is nothing. And now we've got the orange. So we won't get the full logged in symbol until we share it. And I kind of question if this isn't a case where they put a lot of flash and phrasing and redefinitions of things, because we really haven't done any friendship duels between actual friends on Yu-Gi-Oh! But I wonder if this really isn't just a case that I needed to battle 5 people and that was it. And it would have always given me a chain to bind no matter what. And it isn't even really a viral achievement. Hey, we managed to be done with the Master Duel Proficiency exam, so yet another animation popping up here. I don't even really bother to show off the cards we get. I probably should, but these cards are extremely old cards. A project like that, though, if you were going to build it yourself, you would have to hard code it to just connect to very specific Wi-Fi place, and then probably just file transfer using FTP the images up to a simplistic backup server. You might want to get more ambitious, certainly, and you might want to get more ambitious and have AI involved for like face detection, but I don't think you could really set that up and program that. That would be a lot of extra work. I also thought if you had like a custom built photo camera, maybe you could have some kind of key fob or watch button, some kind of Bluetooth shutter button that only allowed parents to enable or disable the camera or take a picture when the parents approve. And I guess this is overall an issue that just probably needs to be the case always, is that by default, as we now are evolving and learning how things can go wrong when kids have cameras and kids have phones, by default it feels like every photo taken should be sent to a parent in a family plan first, before there's any approval whatsoever. And by default, it should be way easier to have like cameras, microphones, and video camera functions disabled. Just purely disabled. The Samsung Kids Mode app is not good enough, and certainly it's exclusive to Samsung. There was a time in the past where selling prints of photos was actually a business, but we have long since moved away from that being a viable way to handle it. Yeah, 1 hour photos. You have to dig deep in your memory to even remember they exist. I'm just rambling today. I'm always rambling though in these live streams. That's just kind of the point in the beginning, was to always use the live streams as a way of, here's where I'm going to talk about whatever I want to talk about. This should be the last game we play. And even at that, this has taken 1 hour and 20 minutes to get to this point. And yeah, I have to kind of applaud the build it yourself camera kit being only about, I think maybe it might be as high as $35 each. Like, that's definitely right in the line of buying a plastic toy for a toddler that looks like a camera, to the point where you might as well just give them a camera and then let them take pictures and then have no way of printing them off or sending them anywhere. Not sure what I should be doing here. Those which cards to play. Back to video game news. GameDeveloper.com says that the Star Wars Jedi Survivor has won Best Score Soundtrack for video games at the Grammys. The composers Gary Hab and Stephen Barton were celebrated alongside Taylor Swift, Victoria Monet, and Miley Cyrus. Clearly there's some search engine optimization happening here to name these other people who happen to be at the Grammys. There is a weirdness to this. I kind of would like to have seen what the other nominees are. Here it is. War of Stray Gods, the role-playing musical, which I remember that, but don't really remember when it was announced. I don't think it really got any coverage. And Hogwarts Legacy, and God of War Ragnarok, and Call of Duty Modern Warfare 2. There is, I think, just definitely some weirdness going on. In that composers have, particularly the Grammys, have done kind of a nice job of adding more prestige to composers. This is a Dragon Knight Dark Magician Girl. Let's go ahead and activate this and hope that we can activate this before she activates her ability. just activated again. So we're on top of the chain. Yep. I guess the point I was trying to make there is, as far as composers, the Grammys have done a really good job of making composers feel prestigious and deserving of awards and get credits. This is a rare example here where we have composers' names actually being mentioned. It really highlights a need for award shows for like video game QA testers, which would be the lowest people on the rung. Programmers, there's, as far as I know, no programming awards out there, and there's certainly room for that. Voice actors in particular have to fight against Emmys and actors in general, or the technical awards version of the Emmys. 3D modelers, animators, things like that. There are just no award shows there. And almost certainly that is in part because there's just a longer history of composers composing for other forms of media, such as radio and radio dramas, music in theater, just orchestra presentations, and TV and radio, and movies. And I don't want to in any way downplay or say that Star Wars Jedi Survivors composers didn't deserve an award, but there is always this unfairness when you praise one person or one group of people in the highly collaborative effort of making video games. Meanwhile, there's many other groups of people who just habitually are getting laid off, habitually are being ignored, habitually aren't even being credited. The video game industry still has major problems in which companies refuse to credit you appropriately, or only credit you if you stay all the way to the launch that could be 4 to 8 years away of a game, and that is assuming that your company doesn't get shut down before the game launches. And yeah, there definitely is a room for a website like IMDb and LinkedIn to be merged together specifically for people who work on video games, but honestly you could probably spread it to a wider base to anybody who works in a collaborative effort to make anything creative at all, or even people who don't work to make anything creative at all. I imagine there's also a lot of like McDonald's and fast food restaurants, or single restaurants that were owned by individuals that don't really have good record keeping as far as whether people work there, and deny that people work there on some occasions just out of spite. Okay, so we spreaded the orange, so now everything should be locked in here, and so we'll see what this animation looks like. It fills in, and we now have Magicians of Bond and Unity, which cannot be normal summoned or set, must be special summoned from your hand by having 25 or more cards in your graveyard, while your opponent has 25 or more cards in their graveyard. This card gains 2,500 attack and defense, so it could get up to 5,000 and 5,000, which is not terrible, but I think you probably would have to build a strategy around it. And I still wish there was a better way to see the image and a way to turn off the prism effect to look at the image. I assume this is supposed to be Blackluster Soldier, and this looks like it's supposed to be a version of Dark Magician Girl, but I wouldn't be surprised if this is some spin-off like Light Magician Girl. It'd be nice if the cards also had like the names of the characters in it. You have a title sometimes, but not the names of the characters. Okay, so I think the symbol was already like that. I think this symbol is already like that. The whole season point things, I don't think we're anywhere close to gaining any of that. Now the symbol's filled in completely. And game reset. And this symbol is filled in. And we've completed everything here. So that does seem like that is just the end of the event. And my only thought here is that at some point we must just have some other symbol that they're planning on adding on either side. We are done with the proficiency test. So click on that to never have to think about that ever again. And then we don't have any new challenges. I don't think there's anything surprisingly new as far as the solo mode. They've added Ghost Meets Girl here as a gate, and that's probably it. I have a decent amount of gems, so possibly there might be a reason to try some of these packs out and see if I want to engage with any of them. We'll do that on Wednesday. And pretty sure we've just bought everything, so we're still caught up on that. We do know that there was one thing in the last event. It was just a dumb little icon, but I do know I didn't get that. I guess the game will probably just let me never recognize that or see a way to earn it. We have a ridiculously long list of icons already. Icons being traded away is another thing that a viral achievement might work with, but the main thing I think you really have to take from this event, though, is it just highlights the problem with virality concepts. This started 3 days ago, like 2/2/2024. Today is 2/5/2024, and already it is to the level that you just have to play 5 games and you have a high chance of getting it all done. I have no idea what these colors really mean, per se. It seems like you can get all the colors anyways. And these numbers really aren't telling you much, it's just showing numbers for numbers' sake. And it might be interesting to look one of these smaller countries' numbers, 4740, and come back in a few hours and see if it's changed at all, or if it's just stagnant, or even look at one of the bigger numbers and see if that possibly gets reset to a lower number. I would assume these numbers are always going to go up. It's also kind of interesting here, you have very much a non-Western, non-North American map, where they have put North America as it is to the east of Japan, and that Japan and Europe and Africa are all on the west. This prevents you from splitting the ocean, which is, I think, way larger than most people know, and probably way larger than this map is actually showing, but then it just splits the oceans over here. And arguably they've made an argument that there really is only one ocean in the world, because all the oceans are connected, and calling them different oceans is just a language trick we're doing. But yeah, it doesn't make a lot of sense, because even in Japan they call North America the West. They they think of North America not being east of them in this direction. They think of it all being west this way, because when they say the west, they're also including all of Europe and all of Australia and all of Africa, just everything. Basically, most maps and most people think of Japan being the east end of the world, and everything else is west of that. And then Alaska is the west end of the world, even though it's very closely connected to Russia when it wraps back around. This has nothing to do with video games, though. Kind of silly events. They put some polish into it, and then very quickly it's just finished. And there's nothing more you can do. It feels like there should be some extra bonus we're getting for just playing more people, or increasing the number of duels overall. And it definitely feels like they should be encouraging actual friend duels with friending people and connecting and making friend connections. It might also be a case that the servers are different in Duel Links, and that's how all the different colored friendship duels came over to the West, is that people played people who got it from the Tokyo Dome in Duel Links, and then people played the same accounts in Master Duel. Moving on, there is a report that Microsoft is rethinking its exclusivity plans for Starfield and Indiana Jones. Well, it's rethinking its exclusivity plans and is considering bringing Starfield and Indiana Jones to PS5. And that is probably the biggest news, but it is also really just a rumor at the moment. Instead, Microsoft has said that they're going to make an announcement in a week, and I'm filled with some trepidation there, because there is a small chance that the announcement in the next week is going to be that they're launching a new console yet again that is completely disk driveless and is online only, and or they're potentially leaving the hardware market completely and only going to focus on PC. I imagine they're not going to do that. I imagine that there's going to be some hybrid announcement if any of those announcements happen. If they just next week say, yes, we're bringing this to the PS5, then, I mean, that's fine. That's just probably the right move. It does give some small support for the PS5, but the PS5 has too high of a player base for anybody really to think that Sony would stop making PS5s, or that they would leave the hardware market themselves. So we're going to more than likely be stuck with Microsoft and Sony for the next generation, and probably the generation after that, and probably the generation after that. Nintendo could throw a monkey in the works at some point, and I could see Sony giving up on hardware if Nintendo came out with a decent console themselves, and then Sony could just publish games and put them on Nintendo consoles. I think Sony might prefer that. But I really don't know what Sony wants to do, because the new guy in charge of Sony Interactive Entertainment has been fairly quiet so far. We should take into fact that there is a new guy coming into power as far as Sony Interactive Entertainment, and that could change the relationship quite a bit, and might certainly explain where the idea of selling games on the Sony PS5 makes sense. It more than likely should just be a collaborative effort where Sony and Microsoft work together to make a console, and then both of them manufacture and sell the consoles to that same standard and specification. And if this was Japan, almost certainly that's what you'd do, is you'd have something that would be the equivalent of a collaborative production committee, where teams from both companies work together to make a console. The console gets made and sold, and then 50% of the revenue goes to Microsoft, 50% of the revenue goes to Sony. Then that just leaves Microsoft and Sony more free time to make games instead for the one console. It's probably going to eventually have to become something like that, because both consoles are just not very unique compared to a computer, and if they don't either find a way to maintain lower prices than building a computer, both the Xbox and the PlayStation brands will eventually just be defeated by computers, pre-built computers, Steam Decks. Microsoft and Sony both can't really compete versus Steam in the price of games, nor can they compete against Steam in the variety of games and the amount of games. They can only really compete on lower hardware and prestige of games and exclusives to at least consoles. Moving on, the indie dev Crop Circle Games appears to be laying off staff. Crop Circle is one of many studios from Undead Labs founder Jeff Strain, and is at work on an unannounced project. So the good news is this may be the only layoff story we have for today. They may finally have laid off as many people as they possibly could. A lot of people, I heard one argument that a lot of these tech industry layoffs, not just in video games but in the tech industry overall, is literally just an effort to maintain lower wages, to lay off people who have gotten a few raises, who are being paid a decent living, and then wait a few months and hire new people at a lower price, which that is in general what layoffs are designed to do anyways, is you lay off 100 people and then you hire back 50 people, or you convince the employees that you didn't lay off that they have to do the work of the 100 people that you laid off, but that usually doesn't last for very long. But yeah, it definitely makes a lot of sense that this may be just a way of them targeting and working together at the same time. Employer benefits employees and union bust in some cases also. And I don't know what you really can do with that. Like, the problem with the worker-employee relationship is it is inherently a relationship designed and based on exploitation, and a manager is not considering themselves a good manager and isn't considered a good manager by their peers unless they are doing everything they possibly can do to exploit the associate level employees underneath them. Maybe if it was a case whenever you laid off somebody, you couldn't hire people at a lower price. If there were some laws on that, that might help a little bit, but certainly most companies skirt the laws regardless. But yeah, something like that could be fairly helpful. Or maybe you even penalize people who lay off employees by saying you can't hire any new employee in any new position at even the amount you were paying the people that you were laying off. You have to actually pay new employees even more, and that there potentially could be a law saying that through that process all new hires are constantly getting hired at a higher rate. Something that would make some sense there, and I'll get off this topic pretty quickly, would be if there was a federally regulated cost of living update So every new job effectively has to pay it to that adjusted ever increasing cost of living number. That probably should be the case too. And theoretically, that is what minimum wage feels like it should be, is that minimum wage should have been increased to adjust with the cost of living, but it definitely has not been increased. And even the push for like $15 an hour, which I think some people actually believe that the minimum wage is $15 an hour, when that was literally just something that people pushed for and promoted. And yes, there are some places that start at $15 an hour, but even $15 an hour now doesn't take into account how many hours you would actually have to work at $15 to make a livable wage, nor does it take into account that even $15 an hour is probably not enough. We could also certainly disconnect healthcare from being a benefit that employees have control over, which makes no sense. And then if employees are not paying for healthcare, they have one less excuse to not be paying a lot more to their employees, because many managers and employers make this argument that, well, I'm paying you $7.25 an hour, but I'm really paying $25 or $35 an hour because I'm paying for a life insurance plan that maybe you don't want, a health insurance plan that you probably need, but it's still going to be crappy because the employer decides what plan you're picking and using. I'm putting money into a 401k that you to match your 401k that you probably don't have any idea how to run a 401k. Noticeably, too, very few companies are paying into a pension, and even when companies in previous decades were paying into pensions were not run by independent accountants. And so there's many horror stories of corporations just straight up laundering money and stealing money from pensions and going bankrupt and being found out that they had been stealing from the pension the whole time. Ideally, you should have pensions. All employees should be given pensions and not pay into 401ks, because 401ks are investing monies in a volatile stock market where the money could go up or down, and you potentially could just lose it all in a crash. And even if you ignore that aspect, 401ks are investing money into other corporations. So really, it's a case where small individual people are being forced into the system to help fund and grow corporations and big business as much as possible, which just morally, if a lot of people thought about it, I imagine they don't want to put their money into some corporations, whether it's a corporation that is like a private military contractor or a drug company that overcharges for drugs, or just a Walmart that underpays its employees. Like, inherently, the stock market has a significant number of people who are semi-involuntarily being forced to give money in the form of buying shares to corporations like Walmart. That if you ask those individual people who have 401ks, do you really want to support Walmart and what they're doing and how they treat their employees and how they treat their customers, a lot of those people would say no. Moving on, though, that's enough of an economics rant for today. Here's the story I was talking about from Komatsu. An Xbox business update event is set for next week. It will have details about their vision for the future of Xbox. Quote unquote, stay tuned. It really could be anything at all. I wouldn't even be surprised if this isn't Phil Spencer deciding he didn't like his job and stepping down, or Phil Spencer getting promoted and bringing back Major Nelson. if you did bring back Major Nelson, I'd have to speculate, at least as a tinfoil conspiracy thought, that Major Nelson literally was doing a stunt by leaving Xbox in the first place, and maybe taking a vacation. Maybe he got suspended because somebody made some accusation against him, and they've now investigated the accusation or something. But yeah, this could be anything. This could just be, we're going to put more games on the PS5 and go multi-platform. It could be we're going to announce a new online-only Xbox. It could be we're getting out of the Xbox hardware altogether. They're probably going to keep the Xbox name and branding. They are still using, in a lot of these screenshots, the older Xbox logos than what we've seen in recent times. And it is just kind of pointless to speculate. Just wait a week and we shall see. And honestly, I'm in such a good position because it just doesn't matter what he says or what they do. I don't own an Xbox. The last Xbox I did own was the Xbox 360. I don't have Game Pass. My only real concern is the development and release of games. So unless they came on stage and said we're not going to release any of our games on PC anymore, it literally is not going to affect me. And it still might not affect me that much if Microsoft said they're not going to release their games on PC anymore. In this, I also suspect that Tim Schafer of Double Fine is going to be out in one way or the other. I think he's probably got a foot out the door, which I don't know if that's going to straight up shut down Double Fine, which I kind of would hope it wouldn't, but I could definitely see Tim Schafer going away. People would stand up and applaud if they laid off basically everybody at ZeniMax, because nobody really cares about the publishing company of ZeniMax, as long as they assure you that they're going to continue to work on Fable games and Skyrim games. Skyrim would actually be from ZeniMax. Fable's Lion's Head, I think, is the company working on Fable. I would much prefer if this event is more focused on promoting games and announcing new games. We have not the biggest of lineups set up for 2024 so far, but there is a question about how many games do you really need to release as Microsoft now, since they own Activision Blizzard. They probably need to release twice as many as they were, and ideally all of them would be good. Moving on, another rumor, today is pretty much all rumors, says that Tencent has reportedly canceled an unannounced Nier mobile game. This claimed the title had been in development for almost 2 years. I mean, that's a shame for the developers, but honestly, that's the right move. We know another Nier game that was a mobile game has been taken down recently, and the Nier series just really isn't going to be benefited by having spin-off mobile games. It's too serious of a series for that. Honestly, I don't know if there's any console style or PC style video game series that is going to be benefited by mobile game ports at all. You certainly can have like WWE Supercard, and that's a totally different game to like WWE 2K24, but that's kind of it. You can have Dragon Ball mobile games, and they can be fairly disconnected from Dragon Ball console games. But the Nier series, even though the story may be long and complicated, is a connected universe with a connected story, and it doesn't make a lot of sense that now at least one, if not two, Nier games that are in part trying to tell that story have been taken down from mobile. And that this probably highlights some flippantness on Square Enix's part. Or flippantness on Tencent's part. Take your pick, maybe a little bit of both. But it also highlights, I think, the flippantness of mobile operating systems too. iOS and Android both have been a little inconsistent in how backward compatible a game can be and how easy it is to just put a game on an Android storefront and have it be there forever. A lot of that comes down to them adding extra security precautions, but in adding extra security precautions they are making breaking changes, which most people are not making enough money on mobile games to justify making a new patched version of their mobile game. Most of the mobile games are based on sending some data to a server somewhere, which is expensive at some level, and anything that costs even a penny is eventually just going to get cut by an accountant who's going to make the argument that the games aren't making enough money. There's also flippantness on the player basis side as far as mobile games, in that most mobile games are completely shut down after 3 years on average, and lots of mobile games never gain an audience. This is a interesting collab that has been announced. Monster Hunter is going to collaborate with Puma, the clothing brand, I believe, with a collection later this year. Capcom says many collaboration projects are planned as far as, I guess, the Monster Hunter 20th anniversary. I wouldn't be surprised if most of this all happens in small collaborations with the Japanese branch of Puma, and it never comes out of Japan. And I guess it says something either about me or about Puma as a logo, in that I recognize the brand Puma exists, but I cannot tell you whether they make shoes or t-shirts or clothing in general. That is something that you do see in Japan, and I imagine they'll eventually stop doing this, as there's just more high fashion that's actually cared about in Japan, whereas there's probably, while high fashion still exists in the West, gamers are there's no overlap between gamers and interest in high fashion. If there was, we'd at least have more fashion in video games and dress up games, fashion games for little girls and such, and we just don't have that many of those. It is definitely a different thought too, the difference between wearing a like $20 Nintendo t-shirt and that being the way you express your love for video games, versus wearing a like high fashion $400, $200 shirt that has a Nintendo logo on it, or something like that. Moving on, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth has sold 1 million copies in its first week. It does seem like that's probably where this is going to stop as far as the headlines go. I'll be surprised if a week from now I'm saying Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth sells 2 million copies. That being said, I think that is mostly an advertisement problem, because reception from Famitsu was 40 out of 40 points. Perfect game, and I'm not hearing anybody say anything negative about it. I'm also not seeing any mainstream video game journalists from the West even covering or talking about Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, so it does feel like it's just going to be yet another Japanese game that slips through the cracks and nobody mentions it, which is crazy, because it's not like there's other games out right now other than Palworld, and even Palworld, I think there's an active censorship campaign from mainstream video game journalists happening at this point on Palworld. Nobody is bothering to review or talk about it any further, despite the player base still being very high. Although I wouldn't be surprised if, as soon as there is a new game that could steal the attention away from the players that are playing Palworld, wouldn't be surprised if the player base does drop. There may very well just not be anything to say about Palworld in its early access current state. Final Fantasy XIV for the Xbox Series X and S open beta start date has been confirmed. This test is only going to be available to newcomers and is planned for later this month, which that doesn't really sound like a beta test as much as it is a free trial. I also think I saw another story about this. We'll wait until we get it so I don't misspeak. So, Suicide Squad tops the UK physical charts this week. So people were willing to buy Suicide Squad and play it. That is yet another game that I think didn't send out early access copies, and thus mainstream video game journalism seems to be willing to say more negative things earlier about the game. That being said, the actual game does look fairly generic and uninteresting, but I think there might be some fun to be found in Suicide Squad if you really want to play it. I'm not sure though if you wouldn't eventually just get your nerves worn down via DLC and microtransactions being added over the launch period, and the game itself being potentially varied. One criticism that I did hear about it that people think is interesting is that you have to actively attack and push forward in your actions to recharge your shield. So it's addressing, in one experimental way, it's addressing the issue of having a rechargeable shield in most games, which just lets you hide behind a rock somewhere and wait a few seconds and your shield will recharge automatically. They've gotten rid of that, and they're saying you have to now target enemies and attack them to get your shield back, which keeps you moving forward and sets a faster pace. And I could see that kind of idea being adopted more and more. Borderlands, which they have a Borderlands 3 Gold Edition that I think they announced, which I guess I'm going to get lucky here because I don't think I bought Borderlands 3 yet. I haven't even played the pre-sequel yet. But yeah, Borderlands had that problem for Borderlands 1 and 2, is that you'd have shields and you'd have these bigger shields, but very often if your shield gets drained quite a bit or gets completely drained, you are still doing that hide behind a rock gameplay style. And cover-based shooting, I think overall as a genre, is probably going to go the way of the dinosaur in favor of more fast-paced parkour shooting. And we probably are going to just have still massive amounts of shooter games to the point where we can split the atom smaller and smaller as far as different ways of describing shooting games. I can't help but personally think that Suicide Squad as a game might have just been better if it didn't have the Suicide Squad characters in it. There might have just been less expectation and less comparison there. But yeah, if it was just a random game called Anthem or something like that before Anthem was already released, I think it probably would have even less press coverage and less people playing it. What really it should have been is probably something closer to like Gotham City Imposters, because I think that one had a bigger player base, and it did introduce the idea of random people dressing up like the Joker or Batman shooting each other, but them not really being the Joker and Batman, so you don't have to worry about like the Justice League actually canonically being killed, and Suicide Squad kills the Justice League. Which I wouldn't be surprised if you get to the end credits and it's just all a fever dream that Harley Quinn is dreaming up, so that they can just retcon everything that happens in the game. Moving on. Seems like we're going to continuously get more information around Stellar Blade, and I definitely am interested in Stellar Blade, but I am also concerned that a overfocus on Stellar Blade is going to lead it to having way too high expectations for what I suspect might very well be something like Enslaved Journey to the West, where that was an ambitious game that kind of came out of nowhere and is doing a different kind of story, and it just didn't get enough reception, so eventually it just got forgotten about and didn't lead itself to making a sequel or anything like that. But yeah, Gamatsu says Stellar Blade's director talks costume count, game flow, and more. Eve is going to have about 20 to 30 costumes, so it definitely feels like it might be more of a Asian style game, in that you might be getting costumes in game, or you might have to be purchasing costumes. I wouldn't be surprised by the time Stellar Blade launches that the skin tight costume is not even going to be the default costume for Eve, and I guess the main character is called Eve. This is a interview basically on Gamatsu though, so it's mostly questions and answers happening. Censored Gaming continuing to make content, basically translating the interviews that would have been published in Japanese. The Like a Dragon boss says that games influence real life violence, which, yeah, a bunch of old people all around the world believe that, despite every single bit of evidence and survey and research being unable to find any kind of correlation, regardless of how much people want there to be a correlation. There is just this desire to say video games cause violence, in the same way that hundreds of years ago they said excessive reading made you physically ill. Whatever the new thing is, the new form of entertainment is going to be the thing that people with even some subconscious bitterness of an older generation, and this is very much just ageism in reverse. They are just bitter that people are enjoying things in general, because old people are in pain and sad and depressed, or a lot of them are at least, and they're just lashing out in a world they don't understand, or a world that's enjoying itself. Inherently, the only violence I've ever seen around video games would be, I don't know what I even want to say here. It would be crazy people that are fantasizing using video games, but even in most of those cases, it's statistically abnormally low. Almost all of the spree shooters and disturbed kids, and you really can't say anything about adults there, because adults have so much access to other kinds of violence. Like, it would be making the same argument that like crazy people go to movies sometimes. This is the reason why this idea even exists, is because there's very powerful lobbyists in the other industries, music, and movies and TV and writing. All of those lobbyists will get lazy at some time and try and push all the blame on video games. Meanwhile, also the NRA actively is lobbying to push that narrative by politicians, and politicians do spout out those narratives over and over again. It's a little weird to have a Japanese person spout this concept out, but it's not like the Japanese don't listen to what politicians say. Most of the Japanese politicians are bitter old people too, and I'm sure they spout the same nonsense. But noticeably, I think it's also worth pointing out that specifically in Japan, there's a ton of gaming by very wide ranges of adults, and there is almost no shootings at all, with one major exception being the shooting of Shinzo Abe, former Prime Minister of Japan, and him being assassinated. And they did a very terrible job of trying to protect him, and were sorely unprepared for somebody to actually have, I think they had a gun, which guns are extremely rare in Japan. But the reason that the assassin who killed Shinzo Abe stated had nothing to do with them really being violent or because of video games or anything at all. It had to do with the fact that Shinzo Abe was the figurehead of a long-running, super conservative political party in Japan that is still today, I'm sure, actively trying to implement a regressive, backwards mentality to bring Japan back to its glory days of World War II and institute a militaristic stance and become yet again a military power, and actively trying to erase history as far as what the atrocities were committed by the Japanese people in World War II. And they do that somewhat secretly, but it's fairly publicly known that his party and his group, which maybe isn't the actual political party, but the group he was a member of, definitely had an agenda that was very right-wing, even for what is your average Japanese citizen, which is fairly right-wing. This story in this interview also is just kind of a great example of a creator of a game being lazy and attacking GTA and using GTA as a way of contrasting their game. He answers some things or points out that in Like a Dragon, you can't throw a punch first. Somebody has to attack you and throw a punch to start a fight, so that makes the protagonist and the story in Like a Dragon better than like GTA. The hero can never hit a woman in Like a Dragon, where arguably being a bad guy and being capable of hitting women as well as being capable of hitting men is egalitarian, to say the least, or possibly even anti-sexist, where it's fairly sexist. It's a pro-sexist stance to say that women should never be hit but men can be hit in the same statement, when really the right answer for the real world people is nobody should be hitting anybody ever, and gender should not be playing a role. But yeah, his interview is mostly defending his game and saying his game is better, and attacking GTA and saying, well that's worse. There is obviously this conversation that is being had as far as violence in video games, and it is arguably becoming a very clunky conversation with a bunch of crazy Japanese directors who are, we know, Like a Dragon games are crazy and they're good at making crazy, silly video games, but they're not really good at making press releases or taking interviews or just staying silent and staying in their lane. But yeah, there is also this other censored gaming story that is intriguing. A game here called Why the Coffin of no, the game is called Coffin of Andy and Laylee's, was rated and self-rated by filling out a questionnaire in Australia, and using the one organization's self-rating system, they gave themselves a G in Australia for the game and general violence. And it seems like in an extremely rare instance here, there was enough complaints about the self-rating G being inaccurate, since there are themes of, I think, suicide, depression, and just violence in this game. People, the more direct, more authoritative organization in Australia manually took the extra step to personally rate the game, so it jumped from a G all the way to an R18 plus restricted, which is the highest rating you can get before you're just straight up at no classification and the game is not allowed in Australia at all. Speaking of Australia, he also retweeted this scene from South Park: The Stick of Truth that says, "Censored, sorry Australia, well, you're not able to see or play this section of the game. In this part you interact with an alien terminal again. Each time you do, Randy is penetrated over and over by an alien probe." So just a koala bear crying and censored. I wonder if, in part, the conversation around video game violence is the Like a Dragon boss's way of shifting the conversation away from the censorship and localization controversy, which I think Japanese fans in particular are not happy to get the feeling that Like a Dragon games are increasingly being made to global standards, was the quote, and thus being censored based on what they would have been had they just been Japanese games first launched to a Japanese audience. But yeah. Meanwhile, you have Yakuza 5 with the big fat lady, and that being censored somewhat. But yeah. There was one instance of a severely mentally disabled person in a mentally disabled school being allowed to have a Nintendo Switch. And this severely mentally disabled person, who probably should have been in a medical prison before this point, had a substitute teacher that took the Switch away from him, and this severely mentally disabled person reacted extremely violently to that and nearly killed the substitute teacher. But yeah, that really has nothing to do with video games. A severely mentally disabled person, if they had like a stuffed bear and then they were told they could have the stuffed bear and then some substitute took away the stuffed bear, the same level of violence would probably come about it. Criminally disabled, criminally insane people should not be used as the measuring stick for anything. It's actually a little shocking that there aren't video games that just actively encourage violence. I can't think of a single story of somebody spending the extra effort to try and dox somebody, or to try and make a mod where you're putting in images of some real world person. Yes, we had the mod of like Barney Doom decades earlier, and the hate for Barney was very high, but that's kind of the last time something like that has happened. It would be fairly easy these days to make a game, and relatively easy, make a game and put it on Steam Direct and encourage the doxing of somebody or the assault of somebody, but we don't see that. We sometimes see games where you're shooting Hitler, and that's about the only living person, or sometimes you might see Biden or Trump troll games that might encourage some violence there, but no other individuals, and that's pretty obvious the reason why that's not why you haven't seen anything like that. It's too much work. It's just too much work to stay that angry to program a full video game and do something that creative. Yeah. And that's kind of the problem with the idea of trying to connect violence with video games in general. Just think the whole process through. Say you're a mentally disturbed person and you have a lot of rage issues, or let's just say you have a lot of rage issues. Eliminate the mentally disturbed part. You have a lot of rage issues. So you're going to say, I'm so mad, I'm going to sit in a chair and play a violent video game like Call of Duty and shoot people for 8 hours because I'm so mad, and that's going to hype me up and that's going to pump me up to go and shoot my boss next week or tomorrow when I go back to work. It's just not realistic. Nobody's going to sit down and play a form of entertainment for 8 hours as a way of training or hyping up themselves. You have a higher chance, if you were really thinking you were training yourself to do some form of violence, you have a much higher chance to either actually go shoot guns somewhere in a range or in the forest and practice if you're planning on shooting people, or you're going to do something like paintball where you're actually physically running around and shooting, and you're going to exercise and practice in that way. Like, virtually shooting people in a video game really is in no way connected to actions that would lead to actually shooting people. In the same way that me watching Food Network is in no way connected to me actually cooking dinner. It might teach me how to cook dinner a little bit better if I was watching Food Network, but I would argue video games don't even teach you that, because video games are not realistic experiences of holding a gun, feeling the weight of gun, targeting, sighting guns, loading guns, disloading guns, assembling, cleaning guns. None of that is in video games. Boxing games aren't really teaching you patterns in as far as boxing if you would get away from guns. Like karate games, of how many few there actually are, aren't really going to teach you karate moves. GTA is not even teaching you how to really drive a car, let alone drive a car recklessly. I'm staying on this topic way too much though. Let's move on. Video Games Chronicle says Microsoft is reportedly considering bringing the Gears of War series to PlayStation also. So there's rumors that Starfield, Indiana Jones, and now the Gears of War series in some form factor to PlayStation, which honestly for Gears of War that's probably a smart move. It would also give you a great excuse to try and remaster and reboot the Gears of War series and try and focus the story either back on Marcus Phoenix or introduce a likable character that isn't just a female character, because we need females in a game that is kind of based off of like the Warhammer mentality of just a whole bunch of dude bro soldiers fighting each other. Unfortunately, this is just another rumor, and we'll know in a week. This is probably not news, but it certainly caught my eye from Komatsu that a game called Rugrats Adventures in Gameland is launching in March for all consoles and PCs. You would assume that this was a remaster of an old game, but it looks to me, no, it is a brand new NES inspired adventure full of mischief, diapers, and imagination. I feel like there isn't any real major resurgence for Rugrats. I know the Gargoyles comic books are coming back, and so we may just be having an overall resurgence in 90s memorabilia, early 90s memorabilia cartoons. But Rugrats in particular is a weird one to try and bring back, but also I wouldn't be surprised if the creators of Rugrats really haven't done anything else with their careers, so why not bring back something they can get some license fees on. Rugrats as characters, I don't think grew up past a certain part, but they did have that Digimon level at which at some point when they got a little bit older and were at least out of diapers, and I think maybe the movies jumped them further. But yeah, it is weird. Nickelodeon in particular, since Rugrats was a Nickelodeon cartoon, has been just completely ruined from what it was. Universal Studios has long since shut down the Nickelodeon studios with all the Double Dare style game shows, and whatever cartoons are on Nickelodeon now are almost certainly not anything worth mentioning. Nickelodeon in particular should be a cable channel that should shift away from trying to be a cable channel and instead be a publisher that would add cartoons to something like Disney Plus or Netflix or Hulu. I also heard Hulu is going to start cracking down on password sharing, which I don't know. I don't think Hulu has a way in which you can break apart an account. So if they are going to crack down on password sharing, you may very well just lose your profile, and arguably Hulu's profile and interface is pretty bad anyways. It's also extremely questionable for them to be cracking down on password sharing when it's still up in the air who is even going to own Hulu in the next few months and what Hulu is going to look like as far as its lineup. The indication is that Disney will probably solely own Hulu in the next few months, and then there will just be this weird Hulu and Disney Plus competing platforms for no reason. But yeah, the problem with the idea of Nickelodeon just licensing all of its cartoons and making new cartoons for things like Disney Plus or Netflix, though, is I imagine that Nickelodeon is owned by Universal Pictures, and Universal Pictures probably has its own streaming Peacock. I would guess if I was going to pick one streaming service, I'd suspect it's probably Peacock that Nickelodeon content would likely go to first. And cable channels stopping from being cable channels doesn't make a lot of sense, because every cable TV payer, people who are still paying for cable, is paying on their monthly bill some amount to those cable channel people, and so they still can get those rebroadcasting fees for cable channels, and as long as that's somewhat profitable, they'll keep on doing it. That is a long side tangent, certainly, from just highlighting, hey, there's a new Rugrats game coming. I wasn't a big fan of Rugrats per se. This might also be a great example of, hey, if you have a game that's a 3D, that is just like a 2D platformer, but you know it's not going to sell that well because there's just a no-name character there, maybe you should get the license to some old series like Rugrats. I could see this easily being a different game where they just at the last second swapped in Tommy and changed the user interface a little bit, and otherwise this would have just been some kid running around in a platforming game. I also have to I would be very interested to see what the reviews are on this game, whether this is just a low effort gimmick game that's really short and not very well polished, or whether it somehow is amazingly good. I typically don't talk about sales, but Amazon.com and Target are offering a buy two get 50% off one on games and other products. The way this is phrased, I think, is a little different from what I saw. I thought it was buy one get 50% off the second one, and the layout as far as Nintendo Switch games on Amazon didn't look like there was a good choice as far as the games. It definitely looked like a lot of the games were third tier garbage games you'd never want to own. I definitely was thinking that if I could get like Metroid Prime Trilogy for the Switch and maybe Pikmin 1 for the Switch, or Pikmin 4, that would be a couple more Nintendo Switch games I could buy for myself. I'm not looking to buy too many Nintendo Switch games, but there's still a few I'd like to play. I don't think I'd bother to try to play Tears of the Kingdom, though. And then GameDeveloper.com has surveyed other game developers and probably put a very biased responses, the most biased to their way of thinking responses as they could here, and made an article. What did developers think about the success of Palworld? The subheadline here is, no one thought a game dubbed Pokemon with games would go as far as it has. I saw a quote here where, I mean, I would assume almost all of this is going to be fairly negative responses. Like, here we have a headline, it's a surprise Palworld works at all, which in fairness is in early access. There's another quote here that is Pokemon with guns good or bad for the game? There's no proof of plagiarism in Palworld, and yet, in parentheses, yeah, that the plagiarism talk has died down, thank goodness, because it's just ridiculous. There was one quote here I saw on Twitter about somebody being sad about it being having guns in it. In fairness, I do think Pokemon with guns, in the way it is depicted, where the characters are actually holding guns, is a dumb idea. But I think the whole game is supposed to be a dumb parody idea of a game, that it is supposed to be more of a joke game, with just a little bit more polish than what we typically see from joke games. It wouldn't be a real problem, though, if, in my mind, if you had the human characters holding the guns, and then the Palworld pals just attacking like animals, and having that split between animals being animalistic and humans being more advanced in their violence with guns. I would probably want to see the guns be turned into zappers of some sort, sci-fi things that would shoot out bolts of electricity to weaken the pals. That would be the direction I would lean here. But the factory element here with the pals, in which you're basically making the pals work for you to manufacture more guns, puts a weird overemphasis on guns and makes it feel more like a Borderlands game. And I guess that's an interesting question to ask, as far as if Claptrap was not a robot in Borderlands, but instead was a cute little Pikachu ripoff character, would that feel better? I don't think so. I think Claptraps as annoying little robots hit the comedy perfectly there, and the high emphasis of guns and bazillions of different variations of guns in Borderlands does not really lean towards a world that needs a bunch of monsters to be shot instead of psycho humans to be shot. Yeah, you create this logical flow problem where if you make a game with guns, then you want the protagonist characters to have guns, which in Palworld includes the pals. and you want the antagonist characters, which also would include pals and possibly other humans, to have guns. So it would make more sense for a tool, a human tool like a gun, to only be in humans, which would make more sense to just be like Borderlands and have humans shooting humans. And on rare occasions, there are monster insect looking creatures in Borderlands that you're shooting with guns, but you're not capturing any of the skags or the other monsters in Borderlands and putting a gun in their hands. That you do have Bloodwing as one of the characters that uses a hunting hawk, but you also don't put a gun on Bloodwing. I would say the Palworld characters are perhaps too cutesy too. If you are going to go this route, maybe they should evolve with like more armor, just like a eye patch over one eye and a scar on the face, and it's just like, yes, these are battle hardened creatures that may start off cute in their first evolutions, but then they should just evolve more like Digimon evolved to have armor and just be more of an edgelord type creature. But all of that is really just assuming that the pals and Palworld is trying to be serious, and it isn't just inherently playing on the silliness of as cutesy as possible characters holding as realistic of guns as possible. Here's that other story I mentioned a long time ago in this stream. Final Fantasy XIV is going to need an Xbox Game Pass core for the Series X and Series S, even though it doesn't need PlayStation Plus on the PlayStation. The subscription, which would have been formerly known as Xbox Live Gold, is needed to play the full release. This is something certainly Microsoft could address and probably needs to address, is that they have consistently required players on the Xbox to pay a monthly service fee to play online, even though a lot of the times the online traffic is being sent directly to the developers of games, not Microsoft. In this case, it would be Square Enix is almost certainly getting the network traffic for Final Fantasy XIV directly, and Microsoft doesn't have to run any servers or spend any real money to maintain a server for an online game. Unless Microsoft is perhaps doing a higher level of voice moderation and text and chat moderation than PlayStation is. But it doesn't really matter what Microsoft might be doing in the background to justify their stance of making people pay to play online. People don't like that stance. People don't like it on Nintendo games, even though Nintendo games it makes a little bit more sense because it prevents really young kids whose parents that don't want them to play online. It stops them from playing online until they find their parents' credit cards and gets the online service. Plus, the Nintendo online service is cheaper. But it doesn't really make any sense on PlayStation or Xbox that you shouldn't have an internet connected device, particularly since Microsoft is trying to push everybody to have an always online experience anyways. It is just not a value add sales pitch to say you should be paying extra to play online on an Xbox Series X. It made way more sense back in the day for Xbox 360, since most of those games were single player, or at least had heavy single player elements, that it would be extra bits of content you were gaining by having Xbox Gold. But that's just not the way the world is now. So I'd like to see Microsoft change its stance there and improve how it deals with all of that. Okay, we're not at the end of the show now, but I still haven't really figured out how to move all the games in the right way. I think the move is probably to just give up, for the time being at least, in the foreseeable future, any thought of curating off screen. I'm just not spending the extra time here. What happens is I'll wake up on a Monday, Wednesday, or Friday and it will already be late, and it just doesn't make sense to spend extra time going through games and curating what games I want to show off. That is the whole point of doing all of this live anyways, is that by doing it live I'm holding myself to some small level of accountability. Oh, I'm glad to see this is mostly positive, since this is just a rip-off of Clash of Heroes, Might and Magic Clash of Heroes, which I am super happy that somebody ripped them off, since they're not going to make any more puzzles and games to play with. I hope this game gets updates and is supported for a while, or more people make rip-offs of it. If we scroll here and not look at the more from Revenge, Might and Magic Clash of Heroes should be mentioned in this list, and it won't be mentioned because the more like this lists are still incredibly bad. And is this game relevant to you? It says it doesn't look like anything else I've played, when I totally played Might and Magic Clash of Heroes. Which maybe that just means they use different tags. Anyways, what I was saying before is I think we're at a point where I need to just have the macro change. So the first thing it does is open up all the games. I'm going to say no to this game because its screenshots are too similar. And then it opens SteamDB in the player base. And inherently, I need to figure out a way of holding myself accountable and making sure I accomplish things when off screen. And a big part of that is just no consistency and no schedule existing in my mind and in my habits. No good habits at all. I'm not regimented at all, and don't schedule things at all. And I don't particularly believe that humans are designed to be strictly regimented and controlled, but by a schedule. I don't inherently believe humans like that experience, but undoubtedly that's the way schools are run. That's the way most jobs are run. Here we have a mostly negative asset flip first person shooter anime waifu game. What's funny about this is that some of these screenshots feel like there might actually have been a decent amount of polish here, but obviously that's not really the case. I'm surprised somebody hasn't actually put a little bit more effort into this. And I guess that will probably be a game like Dueled, where you'll have an interesting anime waifu character, but then you'll have an actual interesting game there. A big problem why it hasn't worked now, that's pretty obvious though, is that these asset flip anime waifu 3D models are always being put in the most generic, most boring zombie shooter game, and even AAA game developers and publishers can't really make a zombie shooter game that's that popular. Here we have what looks like a probably asset flip anime waifu swimming game in VR, which that's at least it's something different. Definitely opens up a lot of possibilities if you're going to have waifus in bikinis and you're swimming behind them and you're getting angles of their bodies. I mean, that is the whole reason for the Dead or Alive volleyball games, which I haven't heard of any of those recently, so I wonder if there's one still in development or if they've finally given up on that series. I haven't heard much from DOA. I did see a YouTube video saying that the level of interest around Street Fighter 6 seems to be particularly low, in part because the character roster, I think, leaked for all the new characters coming out in Street Fighter 6, and in part because the new characters aren't interesting and there's not any interesting costumes. It definitely has been completely silent around Street Fighter 6, and I just don't think fighting games alone can live on whoever in the fighting game community is enthusiastic. Even if a game is super popular at EVO or amongst fighting game players, you need that mainstream audience of people willing to dip a toe in a different genre of fighting games and end up still buying the product. And I would say that the other fighting game series still are making enough sales to justify their existence. But I would say generally fighting game is a niche style of games. I almost want to say yes here. I'm gonna give this a chance. It's probably nothing. It is rated very positively though. Yeah. The Braves beginning. This is a demo of something called the Braves. So I'll put the Braves on the follow list. I've also dropped the ball completely as far as doing any follow list cleanup, so my follow list is just growing and growing and growing, and there is nothing stopping it from growing. That's yet another programming thing I need to get back on top of needing to still schedule some videos. That's another reason why it's so crazy for me to be making Sudoku videos that are 3 hours long, because the amount of content I have here is fairly low. And while I could see Sudoku content getting a lot of watch time, I can't expect that it's going to get a lot of views. Inherently, I'm surprised I don't see more games like this where it's just boxed in, draw a box. This pencil and paper game though is also pretty boring, so it's not super surprising nobody tries to make digital formats on it. Yep. YouTube really does probably want me to make less content and more successful content video to video. So if I could figure out a way to guarantee more success while making less content, I would like to see that happen. This is a shame. All these screenshots look good, but you have a mostly negative experience, I would assume it's probably because these servers are terrible. Or maybe the game is abandoned. Let's look at the credits and see if we can get some negative reviews to find out why people hate it. Needs a huge optimization patch. This was from July 23rd. This is from November 22nd. Game doesn't work. So yeah, they're just saying the game is completely broken. And seems like they may have just shoveled it out of early access, still being fully broken, for free, with a couple pieces of DLC. I'm going to put this on the fall list, but I'm not going to highlight to make it short around a mixed reviewed game. What would probably have to happen if I was going to try and release a video and then give it a lot more time to gather attention and be seen as the newest video as a YouTube content creator, I would have to probably take all the YouTube shorts and put it on a different channel, although it may not matter as far as whether I put out YouTube shorts. But then I probably should at least have a second channel, if not 3 channels, a live streaming channel, a pre-recorded adult gaming channel, and then a pre-recorded, not really kids channel, but Lego game style games. I typically have an earlier time slot in which I'm trying to cover games that are more kid friendly, family friendly, but this is just a prologue for a game that I feel like has been out. Nope, it's not out yet. Interesting. I feel like there was another game called like Hollywood Inc., and this might be somebody trying to make a clone of that. I don't think Hollywood Inc. was particularly good, so maybe it's somebody trying to do better. Yeah. So on some level it probably would make sense to have 3 different channels, but I wouldn't be surprised if in doing that it's just a lot more work and just splits the number of would have split the number of views and watch time. If YouTube wasn't caring about watch time and they were only caring about the number of views or the number of subscribers, then it totally would make sense to make a different channel. But once they introduced watch time as an element, they painted themselves in a corner where that took forever to load those screenshots. It painted themselves in a corner where you really need to have all of your content in one location. I've heard of this game Dominion, but I'm not sure I really know anything about it. It's free to play, but then there's $122 worth of DLC in it. And I wouldn't be surprised if the free to play gives you just a very basic experience. I'm going to go ahead and just add this to my library now. So I'll leave it on the follow, make a YouTube short on it still. Do I need to leave it on the follow list at that point? Probably not. I think we are definitely back into an era in which we're going to have a lot of games coming out. which shifts the scale in a weird way, where even fewer of the games, percentage-wise, are actually good. It definitely gives off the feeling that there's only a finite number of good games that can be released on Steam at any one time, and the rest is always just going to be filler garbage games. I'd almost say yes to this, but it's got way too much neon colors and explosions in the screenshots. Looks like a Metroidvania, and then you have this weird side-scrolling shooter element here. No, this is rated very positively. I'm gonna give it a chance, even though it looks too neonish. Maybe I'm being a little too picky, but it's kind of crazy to say I'm being too picky when trying to curate games to make YouTube shorts on, when I'm making way too many YouTube shorts already. I'm gonna put this on the follow list, but this is one that I don't think YouTube would really appreciate. That's another thing about YouTube shorts too, is that thematically I really don't have any metrics or anything that would tell me which YouTube shorts have succeeded or why certain YouTube shorts have succeeded. I think it probably is almost 100% random, and it's just whatever short happens to randomly be selected and put in front of the eyes of people leads to one view, or often I think one person watches a short 2 or 3 times because they loop around. This looks like this might be a game based on robotics and electricity, but the animation style on it is just awful. This screenshot in particular. Let's see. I'm not sure what this symbol is supposed to be. It looks like a capacitor. So you've got 5 volts coming in, and then the capacitor is dropping it down -3 volts. So then you would have 2 volts coming in and dropping it down at that point to -1 volt, which is just to say you're stopping the flow of almost nothing at that point, and then you have 0 volts coming in. So almost certainly you would have a brownout. This symbol here apparently is supposed to be a light bulb. I don't think that's a symbol for a light bulb in electronics. That might be the symbol of a light bulb in architecture drafting. And then if you put it in parallel, you have a 3 volt light bulb and a 3 volt light bulb. Then you should have 4 volts coming back. Well, no, you should have 2 volts actually coming back, I think. Yeah. Which some of that seems logically right, but I'm not sure all that matters, or yeah, none of it matters. I'm just wasting time there. I wouldn't mind an electronics schematic puzzle game. That would be right up my alley. But schematic drawing in electronics is really just a simplistic introduction to circuit building, and real circuit building is almost certainly going to have some kind of chip, some kind of integrated circuit in it that does something more complicated than just lighting a couple bulbs. Residential wiring, on the other hand, is probably going to completely ignore anything an architecture draws as far as how things would be wired for any reason, and electricians will just do it the way they have been taught by the apprentice electricians will do it the way the master of electronics will tell them how to do it, and that'll just be that. I'm gonna say no to this because the screens are too similar. Um, yeah. And I don't think electrical inspectors in at least the United States actually care whether the electrical wiring is 100% in line with the way the approved blueprints are, as long as it is not violating codes that they're more interested in, mostly trying to prevent fires. Even in that, residential wiring is basically never series. Really shouldn't be series in any real case. It should always be parallel. Ideally, there would be exactly one circuit, one plug, one light circuit connected to one circuit breaker in the junction box, in your circuit breaker box. More realistically, what happens is that you will have 2 or 3 outlets going along one side of the wall and possibly wrapping around to another side of the wall, or even a third side of a wall, and all of those outlets will be in series connected to each other. Or technically they would be in parallel, but they will definitely feel like they are being daisy chained in a series. I mean, a lot of times they are going to feel like they're daisy chained in a series instead of parallel. Sometimes they technically will be parallel, but they never get particularly complicated after that point either. There is a split in residential and even business wiring in that the receptacle, the plug where you plug in the plug, always assumes that the power is coming in and the power is coming out correctly, and whatever you plug into it is just in its own separate circuit that residential wiring does not care about. And then yeah, if you get back to like circuit building, this one seems like this might have some weird math in it. Let's see. I bet this isn't actually a math puzzle at all. I imagine this is probably just a way of getting you to put in like 0000 as the password, or maybe it's a just select the first letter of each word, SC. I'm gonna put this on the fall list, but it looks like it might be a little bit more of a puzzle escape room than just your standard visual novel. Real circuit building, as I continue to ramble and as we're still going through all these games, we should be close to being done. See, this is one of those point and click games that's only in Spanish, but this one seems to be in particularly low visual quality, so I wouldn't be surprised if this is a really early one or the very first one. They're calling it a brief piece of history about Spanish software and video games. Real circuit building is going to have some kind of integrated circuit, and if you have an integrated circuit, then you're going to get either 12 volt, 5 volt, 3 volt, 1.8 volt is the new momentum that they're going to use just the least amount of voltage possible to run energy efficient circuitries. But you're going to get your voltage in, you're going to get ground, you're going to probably get a a clock signal of some sort, you're probably going to connect to some kind of USB connector, if not for data, at least for power. Whatever you're trying to communicate with, if you're using it to communicate in some way, you're going to get a data in and a data out at minimum, if not a data in, data out, and a different clock or the same clock signal. If you're doing something with like an Arduino or an ESP, you're going to have a lot of general purpose input output pins that are programmable so that you can toggle LEDs on or off, or otherwise send a positive negative signal. If you're trying to send out sound, you're going to need probably at least 3 wires. Maybe you could get away with 2. And all of that would have to be on either a single layer or a multi-layer circuit board that you would have to design to do all the routing for. And it's just way more complicated. I almost would say yes to this, but it's still just a little too simplistic. Yeah, it's just going to be way more complicated than you have some 5-volt source and then you have 2 3-volt bulbs, which those are weird numbers anyways. And arguably maybe that's a problem in how electronics is taught, if electronics are taught at all these days, is that arguably the first example needs to be easy, but it's possibly just too easy. It's possibly just too much around the idea of, can you understand this concept that you need to understand to get to the real concept that needs to be understood? I'm gonna give this a chance. And that may not be much more different than programming. I think programming has that same problem, where the first example you're almost certainly going to be taught when you're taught programming is hello world, to just print out the sentence hello world, which has really no connection to making a video game. It has no connection to making a real app. Arguably, if you're going to have your first project be hello world, then you need to integrate at least a graphical user interface library into it and not print hello world to a text console. Well, almost done. Man, this took forever. And that's not even to talk about the major problems with teaching people to program using something like Scratch, which is very much just Lego equivalent to programming and nothing like any other programming language, or using Python, which is a more text-based programming language but is frankly too weird from other programming languages. I did hear that there is also a new language that is in development, so it'll probably take 10 to 30 years before it could even be viable, called Moya, I think is the name of it, although that is also the name of the ship in Farscape, or Maui maybe was the name of it, some M word, which it's like Python, but unlike Python, it compiles like a regular programming language like C++, so you can't just hit go and have the program run and be interpreted, but you can then have much faster, more efficient programs with still similar text syntax. Alright, well, this is interesting to see. Suicide Squad killed the Justice League, which I wonder if I should be careful and not make a short around a game that has suicide and kill in the title, but whatever. Is 84% positive, and online right now is 8,269 people. Its overall 24-hour peak is 10,373 people. Its all-time peak is 13,000. Those numbers aren't particularly great, but it also seems to be fairly well received. Well enough received, unless we have like a case of a lot of astroturfing and positive reviews being added. I am seeing a decent number of negative reviews here too. So it may very well be a case where the actual player base, maybe not being that large, is having fun with Suicide Squad, which I'm not super surprised about that. It'll be interesting to see if we just do see a widening gap between like mainstream video game journalism, who are, I think, pretty much uninterested in saying anything more about Suicide Squad and seemed pretty uninterested in saying anything positive about Suicide Squad, and then the actual video game gamers, which don't make up the mainstream video game journalists. Let's see. And I'm just wasting time here. Okay. Anyways, that ended that as far as looking at the games, but we're already 3 hours in, so it is going to continuously be a case where either I curate the video games, and have considerably fewer to show, which makes sense and makes a better product, but I have to hold myself to the standard of actually making sure I do that, or these shows are just going to go forever and we won't even get to the news and the clips until later, late into the stream. As far as SteamDB, Palworld has a 24-hour peak still of 1 million, just being slightly over the 977,000 24-hour peak of Counter-Strike 2, and so that is, I think, trending downward quite a bit, because its all-time peak recently was 2 million, so it does kind of feel like Palworld may have lost half of its all-time peak players. I wouldn't be surprised if we start to see Palworld settle down into the 200,000s or 100,000 spot, which is where it probably should be. And it may not be that beneficial, particularly in early access state, to have that massive amount of success and interest around your game. Although it's not like they really tried to advertise the game themselves and get that huge number, and it helps to have a huge all-time peak as a way of advertising yourself. But yeah, when you get to the top 16th spot, you're below 100,000 even at that level. We can also see the PUBG Battlegrounds is dropping down to below 500,000, where we're continuing to get peaks and valleys with Naraka, Blade Point, and Baldur's Gate, and GTA 5 is trending downward. Rust is peaking and valleying. Overall, it does just seem like there's really no reason why we would see major jumps in people playing all games. We're looking, I suppose, mostly for new games, so you have like Palworld as an example, and I guess that's really where I'd like to see this chart. If I was going to redo this chart, I would like to see like the finals playtest show up, and then I would like to see Palworld show up, and then the rest of these games, which have had these long trends of people just constantly playing them, like Apex Legends, might as well just be filtered out. And then that would be a much more simplistic chart, I guess, if I filtered out all games that were, say, released before 2024 started. But inherently that would be a different chart too. This is supposed to show me where the players are actually playing, and clearly a significant portion of people who would call themselves gamers are playing Counter-Strike 2 and Palworld, Dota, PUBG. Yeah, if I was to just start highlighting all of the top games, I probably would eliminate all of these top 5 and keep Palworld because it's new, and keep Baldur's Gate 3 because it's new. Then I probably would then be interested in getting rid of like GTA 5 because it's old, and maybe keeping Starfield but getting rid of Cyberpunk. Get rid of playtests after it stops being a playtest. Call of Duty is now on my chart since I've adjusted my chart, and it still has a decent amount of coverage. Monster Hunter World seems to have peaked up in attention relatively recently. Now it's falling down again. Yeah. I could see myself getting rid of what would be easiest is to get rid of Counter-Strike 2 through Apex Legends in this group, including Dota 2. And then the chart could scale a lot better and we would pay attention to other games. But that is incredibly arbitrary to do that too. There's no logical reason to say I'm just going to turn a blind eye to the fact that the vast majority of people still seem to be playing Counter-Strike 2, people or bot accounts. Moving on, we have a Steam Next Fest, which those are the sales that seem like they are least important. And we once again got to Palworld at the top here. So it does seem like Palworld probably is just consistently sold enough now that the algorithm is going to promote it. This Henry Stickman collection is multiple Henry Stickman games. They're overwhelmingly positive. I'm going to put that on the fall list. I remember, I think I saw Game Grumps play one of those. Kind of silly games, but there's apparently a Disney publisher sale, classic game sale. I wonder how many of these games I'm missing. It's kind of crazy to buy Disney Infinity. And the page crashed and broke because of my ad blocker, I think. I own a significant amount of these games. There's still a decent number of them that I don't own. And then what are considered Disney games has certainly expanded quite a bit to include what would have been LucasArts games. And then Star Wars games also being expanded to include this. Most of the really old games here you're owning just because you want to own them for nostalgia reasons. You aren't. It's interesting they're calling this Indiana Jones, Lego Indiana Jones game a LucasArts game because it wouldn't have been a LucasArts game, I'm fairly certain. Yeah, you're just owning them because you assume at some point you're going to have a kid that might want to play video games on your PC. High School Dance Musical 3 is an odd choice. And see, if you have Disney 3.0 Gold Edition for sale, why can you buy Disney 2.0 still available for sale? That's kind of crazy. It's also worth mentioning, this one's probably a good one to get, whoops, that Disney hasn't really been keeping up with licensing or making video games based on their content, and it's not like they've made a lot of animated movies recently, but I don't think there is any PC game for Frozen or Frozen 2, and those games are fairly old. I mean, those movies are fairly old at this point. You would think that there would have been an argument for that. There is Disney Dreamlight Valley, but I haven't heard anybody say anything about Dreamlight Valley in at least a month, which makes me think all attention around Dreamlight Valley is gone, in that they came out of their early access and it felt like they should have been a free-to-play game, and they decided for it to not be a free-to-play game. And this fest seems to be a large collection of live broadcasts, both scheduled and up next, of people playing a large collection of small indie games. There's a danger here that Valve, Steam could be accused of trying to put their thumbs on the scales. Palworld's doing super well. If Valve wanted to steal some thunder away from Palworld, rushing to have a next fest happen would be a way to try and drag attention away from it. I'm not sure it really works. And this next fest seems like it is going to go on at least through Wednesday, Thursday. Is it an entire week? Friday, Saturday? Does it ever stop, or does it just keep going? No, it's Monday, February the 12th. They have just a long schedule that they're planning. Meanwhile, looking at these games, these are all just coming soon games because it is a Next Fest game. So the Next Fest is Valve's equivalent of what I do when I make new and trending games or put games on the wish list and try and promote games that are either really new or about to come out or got some kind of update. Of course, Valve has a lot more manpower and skill than I do as far as making a web page to promote new games. Even being said at that, I still think my YouTube Shorts might be better. And yeah, if at some point Valve wanted to hire me to just make YouTube Shorts based on all their games, and I could get more direct access to their database, I could probably do that. I don't know if they really would ever want to do that. And more than likely they would want to make something that felt like a short that was on the Steam website itself. Actually, I think I could probably do way better than what I do in YouTube Shorts if I had more direct interaction with Steam. I think we could break down games in a much better way so that just at a glance you could see what kind of game it might be and what the ratings would be and what to expect as best as you can expect a game. And it doesn't seem like they're focusing on the Steam Next Fest here on any particular genre. They've got action, adventure, strategy, simulation, RPG, puzzle, platformer, sports and racing. I wouldn't be surprised if there's even more categories that you could find somehow. None of it seems like it's on sale either in any way. It doesn't seem like you can pre-order these games, and it doesn't seem like you can like buy them. You really don't even have a great way to put it on a follow list, which really this should be on the follow list, not adding it to a wish list. Also, I would have to point out that Valve and Steam are still pretty bad in that you only have one wish list. There's far too many games on Steam that only have one wish list. And there needs to be either one master wish list that you can break down into several sub wish lists, or just several wish lists. It would make sense just to have different people profiles in one account for that same reason. So you could have a wish list for like one kid versus the other kid, or one husband, one wife. Anyways, now should be the point where, if my macro is working correctly, we'll go through the video game news. And again, I need to train myself to concisely read the headline, not mess up reading the headline, not make any extra commentary until after I pause, and just get through it all fairly quickly in the whole process. So let's go. This is, I guess, the point where I go on autopilot, and maybe but if you're going to make clips, you can only make clips as part of a larger video, so I have to live stream this part. Otherwise I would potentially do it off screen. And so either I have to think of a new way of making clips and making it interesting, or I just kind of blandly read it like you're reading headlines off of a news page. Let's go. Microsoft will update fans on its vision for the future of Xbox next week. Tencent has reportedly canceled an unannounced Nier mobile game. Steam Next Fest is now live, offering access to over 1,000 games demos. Guess that's what the Next Fest is all about, is just playing the demos. Probably way too much of an emphasis on demos, really. Microsoft is reportedly considering bringing Gears of War to PlayStation. Apex Legends Breakout adds mid-match leveling and scraps armor pickups. Amazon and Target are offering a buy two, save 50% on one on games and other products. Monster Hunter is collaborating with Puma with a collection later this year. Final Fantasy XIV will need Xbox Game Pass Core on Series X and S, even though it doesn't need PlayStation Plus. Suicide Squad tops the UK physical charts this week. Final Fantasy XIV Xbox Series X and S open beta start date has been confirmed. What is the actual start date here? February 21st? Yeah. I guess when I'm making clips here too, I'm also going to try and not scroll down. I think that probably makes some sense too. Although if I got rid of the ticker on top and bottom, which I like the tickers, but I'm not sure anybody else really appreciates them. If I got rid of the tickers, I think I probably could fit the whole thing in the screen, but I'd have to, it probably would just make more sense to zoom out one more or two more. So if I zoom out two more, then you get edges. So that's why that is there. Although this is also a case where the headline is taking up 3 sentences and the subheadline is taking up 2 sentences. So that's why it's scrolling the image down lower. So I guess in that case I probably should just scroll down a little bit. But then it's probably better just to have the headline on screen. I have no idea what the thumbnails for the clips are going to be. I don't think you can set a thumbnail for the clip, so it's probably going to be just the first frame of where the clip starts. Starfield is reportedly coming to the PlayStation 5 along with other Xbox exclusives. Star Wars Jedi Survivor has won this year's video game soundtrack Grammy. Suicide Squad sees less than half the day one Steam players of Avengers. Marvel Avengers was delisted from storefronts last year. I guess that's an interesting comparison to make it to. Let's see, according to SteamDB, Marvel Avengers managed 29,916 players during the first day of full launches versus Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League only managing 13,459. But it seems like you have a fairly loyal player base of people playing that, and these numbers might be skewed in part because of Palworld and in part because Suicide Squad had a pre-order bonus that let, or at least allegedly was going to let players play it early, but that still doesn't make any sense. The only way that would make sense is if nobody bought the pre-order bonus and nobody played early. There's a major problem with scale here, though, because if you were a AA developer or even a indie developer and you had 13,000 players on day one, you would think it was a massive success. Most indie games, most of the games on Steam, seem like they are reaching levels of success if you can just get 30 people to review your game, if you can just get 500 to 1,000 people playing your game, particularly if it is a single player game that doesn't need people to be playing online against each other at all times in some level of competition. Moving on. Pikachu card that caused riots to be massive reprinted by the Pokemon Company. The card was resold for over $600. This was from the Van Gogh Museum, the Van Goghified Pikachu. I guess when I'm doing these clips too, I probably should put the mouse cursor very specifically in the corner here so it's not just arbitrarily in the edge here. Yep. And as far as Pokemon goes, that's pretty much the way it should always be, is that there shouldn't be any effort for Pokemon cards to be artificially scarce. And I question if there's really any value around too many Pokemon cards. I think most Pokemon cards are fairly cheap, even compared to like Magic the Gathering cards. Alright, moving on. The Last of Us Part 2 Abby actor claims fans threatened her child. The incident taught me to keep a distance. Almost certainly somebody somewhere probably said something that could be taken as a threat. Almost certainly these kinds of threats would have happened and would have been spoken out loud, but wouldn't have never made it to the actor if we didn't have the internet and direct communication. There is definitely a great argument that actors should not be public on things like Twitter and such like that, in sites like that, and that instead there should be just their agents on Twitter on their behalf and somebody running in between the two. It's entirely inappropriate, and it's worth pointing that out, to threaten a child, which sounds like it may have been a yet to be born or newborn child, for not liking how the story wrote Abby. If anything, the person to yell at would be the writers and the creators of Last of Us, not the actor. The actor is just repeating words and probably has zero input on what is supposed to be said, what will be said, and such. But yeah, it's an inappropriate response by far. It's stupid. I guess there's nothing else that can really be said on that. There's nothing in more depth to it. It's a dumb thing to do. It's an inappropriate thing to do. It shouldn't have been done. That being said, my only contrasting argument is actors should not be in the public, and actors probably should not speak publicly when they receive threats, because they are probably getting them all the time anyways. Just keep that in your files, report it to the police. Don't come out and try and get persecution points by saying some loony somewhere threatened them. Moving on. The Last of Us 2 was originally an open world inspired by Bloodborne. Developers share the original origin stories in a new documentary. Is this a no-clip documentary, or is it a different documentary? Seems like it's from their own website, their own YouTube channel. This probably doesn't mean much of anything. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if most mini games start one way and then in development shift completely differently. I do certainly get the feeling that Last of Us 2 was desperately trying to move away from being a story-driven linear experience, and I think on some levels Last of Us 2 does succeed at that goal, even though that is probably not what people who played Last of Us 1 wanted. They probably just wanted a continuation of the experience and the story of Last of Us 1. Being inspired by Bloodborne in particular is a weird twist on that. Open world is not surprising. Everybody wants every game to be open world, and almost certainly they were trying to monetize Last of Us 2 as a game that could just be a game as a service that would be played forever, and they pretty obviously failed at that hope. Neil Druckmann confirms he has a concept for The Last of Us Part 3. There's probably one more chapter to the story. Yep, this is older news. EA addresses the FC24 mistake, which saw thousands of players given a 700-pound Messi. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 logo reveal teases a fan favorite song. Shadow the Hedgehog will feature prominently in the film. Inherently, we're going to have some duplicate clips, which I think that's probably fine, but my macro still is opening some older news stories we've already talked about, and that would create some duplicate clips, but whatever, doesn't matter. That just means some people that are looking for one clip may go to one video, where some people may be directed to another video. Either way, it's views. Either way, it's a new way in which some people might be brought to my live streams, particularly the back end of my live streams, where I think viewership almost always drops to 0 or drops extremely low. Moving on to the Gemetsu stories now, then we should be done relatively quickly after that. Dyschronia Chronos Alternate Duel Edition for PC launches March 27th. It includes the investigation action adventure game both in virtual reality and non-virtual reality formats. I think that's probably a story. I don't think that's actually the game. Yeah, there's nothing here that actually is in VR as far as I can tell. Well, that's interesting, so I'll put it on the fault list. Stellar Blade director talks costume count, game flow, and more. Eve has about 20 to 30 costumes. Bears in Space launches March 22nd. The over-the-top bullet hell first-person shooter is priced at $19.99. Let's get that ready. The other part of this is that my macro and advanced scene switcher program needs to only make clips when I'm on certain web pages. So if I'm just looking at a game on Steam like this and I start talking, it should ignore that if programmed correctly, which is a big if. The Philippines set narrative adventure game Until Then has been announced for the PS5 and PC. It's due out in 2024. Now, what I don't want to have happen is a situation where I feel at any point I have to hold my tongue and not talk because talking triggers my program. Like that is not an acceptable trade by any means. I need to spout out as much content and opinions as I can to make my opinions and content valuable. Honkai Star Rail downloads have topped 100 million. The milestone has been achieved after less than a year of service. Rugrats Adventures in Gameland launches in March for all consoles and PC. A baby's gotta do what a baby's gotta do. That being a Red Rugrats line. Do we have a Steam link to it? Now weirdly, the demo is going to be part of the Steam Next Fest, but they don't have a link to Steam. Unicorn Overlord, Yosef's Guide to Interaction trailer is available on Gamatsu. Don't think we'll look at this. Interesting pizza. Like, pizza really historically would not have existed in any format that looked like that until like the United States was established. Decades into the United States being established. Maybe this is some weird alternate universe, or maybe this is far in the future where armor comes back into play. Or maybe they just wanted to have pizza. Moving on. Night Slashers Remake is coming to all consoles and PC. This looks like this might be a side-scrolling beat-em-up game where you're fighting monsters, which is a interesting thought. But one thing I would like to know is, when was there originally a game called Night Slashers? $1994 apparently. Interesting. Well, there definitely would have been a lot of beat 'em up games, so it's not surprising that I haven't heard of it. But then it's kind of questionable whether a remake makes sense if it's not that popular. Although we pretty much remade all the popular, well-known games already, so it is now just looking for more and more rarities when making remakes. Final Fantasy XV Xbox Series Open Beta test begins February 21st. Full game requires Xbox Game Pass Core or Ultimate membership to play. Fate Samurai Remnant DLC Records Fragment Kian Command Championship launches February 9th. There's a rumor that Starfield, Indiana Jones and the Great Circle, Hi-Fi Rush, and more first-party Xbox titles will be coming to non-Xbox platforms. A multi-platform release strategy is reportedly due in February. Microsoft has announced that they plan on announcing something next week. Hollow Body demo is now available. A short playable teaser, which they're invoking PT. But they did bother to make a press release, so give this a chance, make a YouTube short, and arguably these screenshots make the game look a lot better than this screenshot, where this looks pretty bad. Almost done with Komatsu articles. Yu-Gi-Oh! Early Days collection has been announced for the Switch and PC. The update here is that a worldwide release has been confirmed. It is going to include Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 4 and Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 6 and more. Inherently, this is going to be like a nostalgia re-releases, but it is also skipping over a lot of... It's not just Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 1, 2, and 3 that they're skipping over. They're going to be skipping over a bunch of side games also. I'm pretty sure one of these Yu-Gi-Oh! Old games also never got translated and released to the West. I don't hate the idea of owning these games and maybe making a short series to just highlight how different the card games were in their original releases, how much these games were released before even the anime series and the card game had been established. So there were completely made up rules, completely different rules. Early Days collection probably stops at the end of the first anime series. I don't think there have been any new games based off the second anime series or the third or the fourth or the fifth or sixth. They have been making Yu-Gi-Oh! Games, but they've definitely still implied that Yu-Gi-Oh! Is Yugi and Yami Yugi with the Millennium Puzzle piece around his neck. The Millennium Puzzle around his neck. They haven't gotten any traction to make new games. Yeah, the game that wasn't released would have been the 2000s Yu-Gi-Oh! Duel Monsters 4 Battle for the Greatest Duelist for Game Boy Color. But yeah, I would really hope that this is going to be a complete collection of all of the old games. But it probably is just going to be an emulator with all the ROMs of the old games. And so we probably could just get the ROMs of all these old games instead of rebuying it. Arguably though, this is another case where Konami is in charge, so they probably aren't going to put a lot of effort into it. Moving on. Neil Druckmann has a concept for the third Last of Us. It does feel like there's probably one more chapter to this story. For years now I haven't been able to find that concept, but recently that's changed. That is way too long of a headline for a clip, in my opinion. It's just going to be way longer than any other clip. And then that brings us to the GameDeveloper.com articles. Let's go through these very quickly, then I need to be done. Indie developer Crop Circle Games appears to be laying off staff. Apex Legends next season breeds mid-match character leveling. Only half of developers saw a pay raise in 2023. Tencent reportedly canceled an unannounced Nier mobile game. Star Wars Jedi Survivor wins Best Score soundtrack for video games at the Grammys. There's a report that Microsoft is rethinking its exclusivity plans to bring Starfield and Indiana Jones to the PlayStation 5. And a survey says live service games are on the rise, but dev teams struggle to keep up. And that is it for this stream. As always, I ask you to like, share, subscribe, comment, and watch every second of my videos. Thank you for watching. Have a good evening.